The muzzle flash lit up the darkness like hellfire as Jonah Mercer pulled the trigger, watching the raider crumple in his doorway while blood pooled beneath the Arizona moon. Thunder crashed overhead, but it couldn't drown out the dying man's whispered confession, "We should have killed you with your wife." In that moment, Jonah knew the past he'd buried had clawed its way back to life, and this time it wouldn't rest until one of them was dead. If you're watching this tale unfold, drop a comment about your city below. I'd love to know how far this story travels. The storm hit the Arizona territory like the wrath of God himself, turning the desert into a churning sea of mud and shadow. Lightning split the sky in jagged veins of white fire, illuminating the small ranch house that sat alone in the valley 20 miles from the nearest town. Inside, Jonah Mercer sat at his kitchen table, a half-empty bottle of whiskey at his elbow, and a Colt 45 within easy reach. The oil lamp flickered with each gust of wind that found its way through the gaps in the walls, casting dancing shadows across his weathered face. At 42, Jonah looked 10 years older. His dark hair had gone gray at the temples, and deep lines etched the corners of his eyes, not from laughter, but from squinting into too many sunsets searching for threats that never seemed to stop coming. His hands, scarred and calloused from years of gun work and ranch labor, trembled slightly as he poured another drink. Not from fear, Jonah Mercer had forgotten how to be afraid years ago. They trembled from memory. 3 years. 3 years since Clara had died in his arms, her white nightgown turning crimson while she whispered his name with her last breath. 3 years since he'd hung up his U.S. Marshal's badge and retreated to this patch of nowhere, trying to outrun the ghosts that followed him like loyal dogs. But on nights like this, when the storm raged and the whiskey ran low, those ghosts grew bold. "Should have been me," he muttered to the empty chair across from him, Clara's chair, which he still couldn't bring himself to move. "Should have been me, not you." The wind howled its agreement, rattling the windows in their frames. Jonah reached for the bottle again, but his hand froze halfway. Something was wrong. The horses in the barn, they were making noise. Not the restless shuffling of animals bothered by thunder, but the sharp, panicked whinnying of creatures sensing predators. Jonah's transformation was instant. The broken widower vanished, replaced by the deadly lawman he'd once been. In one fluid motion, he extinguished the lamp, grabbed his rifle from its place by the door, and melted into the shadows. His boots made no sound on the wooden floor, a skill learned from Apache scouts during his early years wearing the badge. Through the rain-lashed window, he saw them, 3 figures moving through the storm, using the lightning flashes to navigate toward his barn. They moved like men who'd done this before, spread out, weapons drawn, communicating with hand signals. Raiders. Horse thieves at best, killers at worst. Jonah's jaw tightened. He'd chosen this remote spot specifically to avoid trouble, but trouble, it seemed, had a long memory and a talent for finding him. He slipped out the back door, becoming one with the storm. The rain soaked through his shirt immediately, but he barely noticed. His focus had narrowed to a razor's edge, every sense attuned to the hunt. The first raider never heard him coming. Jonah emerged from the darkness like a specter, his knife finding the soft spot between ribs before the man could cry out. He lowered the body gently to the mud, then moved toward the barn where the other 2 had entered. "Check the house," a gravelly voice commanded from inside. "Rivers said the old man keeps his money in a strongbox under the floorboards." Rivers. Jonah knew that name, a 2-bit outlaw who'd been running cattle across the border. But how did Rivers know about his house? About him? "What if he's awake?" another voice asked, younger, nervous. "Then we kill him. Wouldn't be the first lawman we've put in the ground." Jonah's blood turned to ice. These weren't random thieves. They'd come specifically for him. He shifted his position rifle, rising to his shoulder. Through a gap in the barn's siding, he could see them clearly now, one tall and lean, the other shorter, but broader. The tall one had his back turned, examining Jonah's horses with the eye of a man who knew good horseflesh. "This black mare's worth a fortune," the tall one said. Rivers was right about. The rifle's report was swallowed by a crash of thunder. The tall raider pitched forward into the hay, a dark stain spreading across his back. The shorter one spun his pistol, coming up, but Jonah was already moving. He burst through the barn door, tackling the man before he could fire. They went down hard in the mud, wrestling for control of the gun. The raider was younger than Jonah, but strong with the desperate strength of a cornered animal. His fist connected with Jonah's jaw, sending stars across his vision. But Jonah had learned to fight through pain years ago. He drove his knee into the man's stomach, then brought the butt of his rifle down hard on his temple. The raider went limp. Breathing hard, Jonah dragged the unconscious man into the barn, using rope to bind his hands and feet. As he worked, lightning illuminated something that made his hand still a tattoo on the raider's forearm, a snake wrapped around a skull. He'd seen that mark before years ago on men who'd ridden with Marcus Cordell's gang. Marcus Cordell. The name hit him like a physical blow. The outlaw who'd led the raid that killed Clara. The man who'd disappeared like smoke after that night, leaving Jonah with nothing but grief and unanswered questions. Cordell was supposed to be dead hanged in Mexico 2 years back, but this tattoo, fresh and dark against pale skin, suggested otherwise. The raider groaned, beginning to stir. Jonah grabbed a bucket of rainwater and threw it in his face. The man came to sputtering, his eyes widening when he saw Jonah's face in the lamplight. "Jesus Christ," he breathed. "You're him. You're Jonah Mercer." "That's right," Jonah said quietly, pressing the barrel of his Colt against the man's forehead. "And you're going to tell me everything about Marcus Cordell, starting with why his men are at my door." The raider tried to laugh, but it came out as a frightened wheeze. "You don't know nothing, do you? Cordell ain't dead. He's got protection now. Important people. And they want you finished." "What people?" "I don't know names. I just follow orders. But Cordell, he's been talking about you. Says you're the only loose thread that needs cutting." Jonah's finger tightened on the trigger. "Where is he?" "I don't know. I swear. We get our orders through Rivers. He meets with Cordell somewhere near Tucson, but that's all I—" The barn door exploded inward. Another raider one Jonah had missed stood silhouetted against the storm, shotgun raised. Jonah rolled aside as the weapon roared pellets, tearing through the space where he'd been. He came up firing his Colt, barking 3 times. The raider staggered back, clutching his chest, then collapsed in the doorway. Jonah turned back to his prisoner, but the bound man had gone pale, his eyes fixed on something beyond Jonah's shoulder. Blood bubbled from his lips. A stray pellet from the shotgun blast had found him. He tried to speak, but only managed a wet gurgle before his head lolled to the side. "Damn it," Jonah muttered. He'd lost his only source of information. He searched the bodies, finding little of use, some ammunition, a few dollars, and a crumpled piece of paper in the tall raider's pocket. It was water-damaged, but still readable, a crude map marking several ranches in the area with X's through 3 of them. His ranch had a circle around it with a note, "Mercer Priority. Make it look random." Jonah stared at the paper as rain drummed on the barn roof. 3 ranches already hit. Had those been tests, or were they eliminating witnesses to something larger? He thought of his nearest neighbors, the Hendersons, an elderly couple who'd been nothing but kind to him since he'd arrived. Their ranch was one of the marked ones. Without hesitation, Jonah saddled his black mare Midnight. The storm was beginning to pass, but the roads would be treacherous. Still, if there was even a chance, the Hendersons were still alive. He had to try. The ride took 2 hours through the mud and rushing arroyos. By the time Jonah reached the Henderson ranch, dawn was breaking gray and grim through the dissipating clouds. He smelled the smoke before he saw it, the acrid stench of burned wood, and something worse, something that made his stomach turn. The house was a blackened skeleton against the morning sky. The barn still smoldered, and in the yard 2 shapes covered by a horse blanket someone had hastily thrown over them. Jonah dismounted slowly, his boots squelching in the mud as he approached. He didn't need to look under the blanket to know what he'd find, but he did anyway. Tom and Martha Henderson shot execution style. "Found them like that yesterday evening." Jonah spun his gun, clearing leather before he recognized the voice. Sheriff Ben Crenshaw stood at the edge of the property, his own weapon holstered, hands raised peacefully. Crenshaw was a good man, one of the few lawmen Jonah had maintained contact with after Clara's death. "Ben," Jonah said, holstering his Colt. "What happened here?" "Was hoping you might tell me," Crenshaw replied, walking closer. His badge caught the weak morning light. "This is the 3rd ranch hit this week. No survivors at any of them. Except now you show up, and I'm betting it ain't coincidence." Jonah pulled out the map he'd taken from the dead raider, handing it to Crenshaw. The sheriff studied it, his face growing grimmer with each second. They hit my place last night, Jonah explained. I stopped them, but not before learning this is connected to Marcus Cordell. Crenshaw's head snapped up. Cordell's dead, hanged in Sonora 2 years back. That's what we were meant to think. But his men are still wearing his mark, still following his orders. And apparently someone with power is protecting him. Someone with enough pull to organize this. Crenshaw gestured at the devastation around them. That's not just any outlaw's reach, Jonah. That's political power. Railroad money, maybe. Or mining interests. Jonah nodded. It was a conclusion he'd been avoiding, but one that made terrible sense. The Arizona Territory was changing. The railroad was coming through, bringing civilization and profit to those positioned to capitalize on it. And men like Cordell, who knew the territory's hidden places and could make problems disappear, would be valuable to certain ambitious individuals. There's more, Jonah said. The raider mentioned Tucson, said that's where Rivers meets with Cordell. Rivers is small time, Crenshaw mused, but he's been flush lately, spending money at the saloons like he struck gold. He paused, studying Jonah's face. You're going after them. It wasn't a question. They came for me, Ben. Made it personal. And if I don't stop them, more people like the Hendersons are going to die. Crenshaw sighed, looking older than his 50 years. I can't officially sanction this. You're not a marshal anymore. I'm not asking for sanction. But, Crenshaw continued, if you happen to find evidence of criminal activity and brought it to the proper authorities, well, that would be a civic duty. Jonah almost smiled the first time he'd come close in months. Appreciate that, Ben. There's something else, Crenshaw said, his voice dropping. Yesterday, before all this, a woman came through town asking questions. Pretty thing, but tough looking, said she was a journalist from back east writing about frontier justice. But the questions she was asking, they were about you, Jonah, and about what happened to Clara. Jonah's blood chilled. What did you tell her? Nothing. Didn't like the feel of it. But she was headed toward Skeleton Canyon, said she had a source meeting her there. Skeleton Canyon, a maze of ravines and hidden trails near the Mexican border. It was perfect outlaw country, the kind of place where people disappeared and were never found. If this woman was walking into that alone, she was either very brave or very foolish. Did she give a name? Jonah asked. Eleanor Grant. Said she was with the Philadelphia Inquirer, but when I telegraphed to check, they'd never heard of her. Grant. The name struck a chord, but Jonah couldn't place it. Still, if she was asking about Clara about that night, then she might know something, or she might be bait in a trap. I'll find her, Jonah said. Figured you would. Crenshaw turned to leave, then paused. Jonah, be careful. Whatever this is, it's bigger than just Cordell settling old scores. Someone's cleaning house, and you might be the only one who knows why. As Crenshaw rode away, Jonah stood in the Hendersons' ruined yard, watching the sun burn through the last of the storm clouds. 3 years he'd tried to bury his past, to live quietly with his grief. But the past, it seemed, wasn't finished with him. He mounted midnight and turned toward Skeleton Canyon. The black mare seemed to sense his mood, her ears pricked forward, her gait eager despite the long night. They'd been partners for 5 years now through gunfights and long pursuits through Clara's death and the empty years that followed. She was the only living thing he truly trusted anymore. The trail to Skeleton Canyon wound through increasingly rough country. Saguaro cacti stood like sentinels on the ridges, their arms raised in silent surrender to the sky. Red rocks jutted from the earth like broken teeth, and the air grew thick with the smell of creosote and dust. This was Apache country once before the wars pushed them onto reservations. Now it belonged to no one and everyone, a lawless strip where Mexico and America blurred together. Jonah found the first sign of trouble 2 hours into the canyon, fresh horse tracks, maybe 6 or 7 riders heading deeper into the maze. One set was smaller, lighter, possibly a woman's horse. They were maybe 3 hours ahead of him, moving fast, but not frantically. They didn't know they were being followed. He tracked them through the winding passages, reading the story written in hoofprints and disturbed stones. Here they'd stopped to water the horses. There someone had dismounted to check something, or someone they were transporting. The tracks grew fresher as the sun climbed toward noon, the heat building between the canyon walls until the air shimmered like water. Then he heard voices echoing off the rocks, too distorted to make out words, but clear enough to count. Multiple men, and they were laughing, the kind of laughter that made Jonah's hand drift to his gun. He left Midnight hidden behind a cluster of boulders and climbed the canyon wall, moving carefully from handhold to handhold. His ribs protested bruised from the fight in the barn, but he ignored the pain. At the top, he belly-crawled to the edge and looked down. 7 men sat around a small fire despite the heat passing a bottle between them. Their horses were tied nearby, and hanging from a cottonwood tree was a burlap sack swaying slightly in the breeze. The sack was large enough to hold a person, and it was moving. "How long are we going to leave her up there?" one of the men asked. Jonah recognized him. Pete Dawson, a gun hand who'd ridden with various gangs over the years. "Till she's ready to talk," another replied. This one Jonah knew by reputation. Sam "Smoke" Jensen called that because he always left burning buildings in his wake. Cordell wants to know everything she knows, who else she's told. "Don't see why we can't have some fun first," a third man suggested, his leer evident even from Jonah's position above. "Because Cordell said to deliver her breathing," Smoke replied. "You want to explain to him why you couldn't follow simple orders." The men fell silent at the threat of Cordell's anger, more effective than any moral argument. Jonah studied the layout. 7 men, all armed, spread out enough that he couldn't take them all at once. The sack Eleanor Grant presumably hung 15 feet from the nearest cover. Even if he could get to her, cutting her down would leave them exposed for too long. He needed a distraction. Jonah crawled back from the edge and made his way along the rim until he found what he was looking for, a section of loose rocks perched precariously above a narrow part of the canyon. It wouldn't block the passage completely, but it would cause chaos. He wedged his rifle barrel under the largest boulder and levered hard. The rocks went down like thunder, crashing into the canyon with a roar that echoed for miles. Shouts erupted from below as the outlaws scrambled for cover, certain they were under attack. Jonah was already moving, sliding down the opposite wall with reckless speed. He hit the ground, running his knife out, slashing through the rope holding the sack. It dropped hard, and a muffled cry came from inside. No time to be gentle. Jonah threw the sack over his shoulder and ran for the horses. "There! It's one man!" Gunfire erupted behind him. Bullets whined off rocks, kicking up spurts of dust at his feet. Jonah reached the horses and threw the sack across the saddle of the nearest one, a sturdy paint mare. He was swinging up behind it when fire traced across his left arm, a bullet grazing him. He got the horse moving, leaning low over its neck as more shots rang out. The other horses, spooked by the gunfire, pulled at their tethers. Jonah slashed the ropes as he passed, sending them scattering into the canyon. That would slow pursuit. The paint mare was fast bred for this rough country. They thundered through the twisting passages, the sack bouncing dangerously. Jonah could hear muffled protests from inside, but he couldn't stop yet. The outlaws would be on foot for now, but they'd regroup quickly. After 10 minutes of hard riding, he found a hidden alcove he'd noted on the way in. He guided the mare inside and quickly cut open the sack. A woman tumbled out, gasping for air, her dark hair wild and her dress torn. She had bruises on her face, but her green eyes were fierce, alive with anger rather than fear. "Who are you?" she demanded, then saw his face clearly. Her expression changed to something like recognition. "My God, you're him! You're Jonah Mercer!" "How do you know me?" "I've been looking for you for 2 years," she said, struggling to sit up. Her hands were tied, and Jonah cut them free. "My name is Eleanor Grant. My sister was Sarah Grant." The name hit Jonah like a bullet. Sarah Grant, the woman who'd tried to warn him about the raid, who'd come to him with information about Cordell's plan. He'd dismissed her concerns, thought she was just another hysterical woman afraid of shadows. 3 days later, Clara was dead, and Sarah had vanished. "Sarah," he said quietly, "she tried to tell me. She tried to save your wife." Eleanor interrupted, rubbing her wrists where the rope had cut into them. "She'd overheard Cordell planning the raid. But you didn't believe her, and when she went to stop it herself..." Eleanor's voice caught. "They killed her. Made it look like she'd run off with some drifter, but I knew better. Sarah would never have left without saying goodbye." The weight of another failure settled on Jonah's shoulders. Another woman dead because of his arrogance, his certainty that he knew better. I'm sorry. He said the words pathetically inadequate. I don't want your apology, Eleanor replied, standing despite her obvious pain. I want justice. That's why I'm here. I've spent 2 years tracking down the truth about what happened that night, and I finally found it. What truth? The raid on your home wasn't random. Someone paid Cordell to kill you, but Clara got in the way. Someone who knew you were getting close to uncovering something big. Uncovering what? Eleanor reached into her boot and pulled out a small oilskin packet. This. Sarah had found documents proving that Judge Theodore Prescott has been using his position to seize land along the planned railroad route. He's been having people killed their land claimed by the territory for back taxes, then sold cheap to his associates. You were investigating similar disappearances, getting close to the truth. Judge Prescott. Jonah knew him, a powerful man with political ambitions talked about as a future territorial governor. He'd always seemed above reproach, a pillar of law and order in a lawless land. You have proof. I had more, but they took it when they captured me. This is all I managed to hide. But it's enough with testimony to start an investigation. Shouts echoed through the canyon. The outlaws had recovered their horses. We need to move, Jonah said. Can you ride? I can do whatever's necessary, Eleanor replied, though she swayed slightly on her feet. Jonah helped her onto the paint mare, then whistled sharply. A moment later, Midnight appeared, having heard his call. He mounted quickly, looking back at Eleanor. Stay close. We're going to have to ride hard. Where are we going? Tucson. If Prescott's involved, we need to get this evidence to someone who can act on it, someone above his influence. And if they catch us, Jonah's face was grim. They won't. They rode out of the alcove and into a hail of gunfire. The outlaws had split up, trying to cut off their escape routes. Jonah drew his Colt, firing back while guiding Midnight with his knees. The horse knew this dance, had performed it dozens of times. She wove between bullets like they were raindrops. Eleanor, to her credit, didn't scream or panic. She kept low on her horse, following Jonah's lead through the narrow passages. When a rider appeared ahead of them, she didn't hesitate. She rode straight at him, forcing him to dodge aside or be trampled. They burst out of the canyon into open desert, the outlaws still pursuing. Jonah could see dust clouds in the distance, more riders coming from the direction of Tucson, reinforcements or lawmen. There was no way to tell. This way, he shouted, veering toward a cluster of ruins, an old Spanish mission abandoned for decades. Its walls would provide cover, and he knew the layout from past pursuits. They reached the mission just as the riders behind them closed to shooting distance. Jonah and Eleanor dismounted, taking cover behind the crumbling adobe walls. The paint mare, well-trained, moved to safety without prompting. Midnight stood steady, waiting. How much ammunition do you have? Eleanor asked, checking the rifle she'd grabbed from the horse's saddle. Not enough for a siege, Jonah admitted, but maybe enough to make them think twice. The outlaws spread out surrounding the mission. Jonah counted 12 now, the original 7 plus 5 more. Smoke. Jensen's voice carried across the distance. Mercer. Send out the woman and we'll let you walk away. This ain't your fight. Every fight's my fight when it involves murdering women and burning families out of their homes, Jonah called back. Big words from a man who let his own wife die. The words were meant to anger him, make him reckless. 3 years ago they might have worked. Now Jonah felt only cold purpose. He'd failed Clara, failed Sarah Grant, failed the Hendersons. He wouldn't fail again. They're moving in, Eleanor said, sighting down her rifle. Wait, Jonah said. Let them get closer. Make every shot count. The outlaws advanced in short rushes, using the scattered rocks and desert scrub for cover. They were good, experienced, but Jonah had been doing this longer. He watched their pattern, noted which ones were aggressive, which cautious. Smoke Jensen hung back, directing the others the smart play. The one on the left behind the Joshua tree, Jonah murmured to Eleanor. When I fire you, take him. She nodded, adjusting her aim. Jonah's rifle cracked, taking an advancing outlaw in the chest. Eleanor fired a heartbeat later, her target spinning and falling. The other outlaws dove for cover, their advance stalled. You shoot well for a journalist, Jonah observed, reloading. I had a good teacher, Eleanor replied. Sarah. She said a woman alone in the frontier needed more than words to protect herself. They exchanged fire with the outlaws for several minutes, neither side gaining advantage. Then Jonah heard something that made his blood run cold. Horses approaching from the north. Many horses. "Company," he said. Eleanor looked where he pointed. A dust cloud was approaching fast. "Friends or enemies?" "In my experience, usually enemies." But as the riders grew closer, Jonah saw something that gave him hope, the glint of badges. A lot of badges. The lead rider was Ben Crenshaw, and beside him rode someone Jonah hadn't expected, Deputy U.S. Marshal Samuel Webb, his former colleague. The outlaws saw them too. Some began to run, but they didn't get far. The posse spread out with practiced efficiency, cutting off escape routes. Smoke Jensen tried to make a stand, but found himself staring down 20 rifle barrels. "Drop your weapons," Crenshaw shouted. "You're surrounded and outnumbered." One by one, the outlaws complied. Jonah stood slowly, helping Eleanor to her feet. She leaned against him, exhaustion finally catching up to her. They walked out of the ruins as the posse rounded up the captured men. Samuel Webb dismounted and approached them. He looked older, grayer, but his eyes were still sharp. "Jonah, when Crenshaw's telegram said you were in trouble, I came as fast as I could." "Sam," Jonah said, shaking his hand, "it's been a long time." "Too long. I heard about Clara. I'm sorry I couldn't make the funeral." "You were on assignment." "I understood." Webb's eyes shifted to Eleanor. "Miss Grant, I presume your telegram to the marshal's office caused quite a stir. Claims about Judge Prescott aren't made lightly." "They're not made at all unless they're true," Eleanor replied, straightening despite her obvious pain. She pulled out the oilskin packet. "This is just a sample of what I've gathered." Webb took the packet, scanning its contents. His face grew progressively grimmer. "This is serious. If even half of this is true." "It's all true," Eleanor said firmly. "And there's more hidden in Tucson. I can take you to it." "Wait," Jonah said, something nagging at him. "Sam, how did you get here so fast? You were stationed in Phoenix last I heard." "I was in Tucson," Webb replied. "Following up on some irregularities in land transfers. Seems we've been investigating the same thing from different angles." It made sense, but something in Webb's tone bothered Jonah. Maybe it was paranoia, but after everything that had happened, paranoia seemed prudent. "We should get Miss Grant to a doctor," Webb continued, "and then we need to move fast. If Prescott gets wind of this, evidence might start disappearing." They loaded the captured outlaws onto horses, hands tied, and began the ride to Tucson. Eleanor rode beside Jonah, swaying occasionally, but refusing his offers to stop and rest. Webb rode ahead, talking with Crenshaw. The other deputies formed a protective circle, alert for trouble. "You don't trust him," Eleanor observed quietly. "I don't trust anyone right now," Jonah replied. "Except maybe you, and that's only because they were trying to kill you." "Fair enough, but Webb seems genuine." "Maybe, but Prescott couldn't have done all this alone. He'd need someone inside the marshal's office, someone to misdirect investigations, lose evidence." Eleanor considered this. "You think Webb—" "I don't know what I think, but I plan to keep my eyes open." They reached Tucson as the sun was setting, painting the adobe buildings gold and red. The town had grown since Jonah's last visit. More saloons, more shops, a new hotel that looked almost respectable. Progress marching inexorably across the desert. Webb led them to the marshal's office, a solid building near the center of town. The captured outlaws were locked up, though Smoke Jensen kept smirking like he knew something they didn't. That worried Jonah more than any threat. "Miss Grant needs medical attention," Webb announced. "There's a good doctor 2 streets over." "I'll take her," Jonah said. "Actually, I need you to give a statement," Webb replied. "Everything that's happened officially documented. Deputy Morris can escort Miss Grant." Every instinct Jonah had screamed danger, but Eleanor touched his arm. "It's fine. Get your statement done. I'll be back soon." Reluctantly, Jonah watched her leave with Deputy Morris, a young man who looked fresh out of training. Then he followed Webb into the office. "Have a seat," Webb said, pulling out paper and ink. "Tell me everything from the beginning." Jonah talked for an hour, detailing the raid on his ranch, the connection to Cordell finding Eleanor, the documents she'd shown him. Webb wrote it all down, asking occasional questions. It felt wrong somehow, too easy. "This is quite a story," Webb said when Jonah finished. Cordell alive. Prescott corrupt. It's going to cause a sensation. Where's Eleanor? Jonah asked. She should be back by now. Doctor's probably being thorough. She was in rough shape. But Jonah was already standing. Something was wrong. He could feel it in his bones, the same instinct that had kept him alive through years of wearing the badge. I'm going to check on her, Chuck, he said. Jonah, wait. But Jonah was already out the door, moving fast through the darkening streets. The doctor's office was lit, but when he entered, he found only the doctor, an elderly man cleaning his instruments. Where's the woman who was brought here, dark hair injured? The doctor looked confused. No one's been brought here today, Marshal. Jonah's blood went cold. He ran back to the marshal's office, finding Webb still at his desk. Where is she? Jonah demanded, his hand moving to his gun. Webb stood slowly, his own hand drifting to his weapon. Jonah calmed down. Where is Eleanor Grant? I don't know what you're talking about. She's at the doctor. No, she's not. She never made it there. What have you done, Sam? Webb's face changed, the mask of friendship falling away. You always were too smart for your own good, but also predictable. Your need to protect people, especially women, it makes you vulnerable. You're working with Prescott. Working with him, Webb laughed bitterly. I've been cleaning up his messes for 3 years. Do you know how much he pays to make problems disappear, more than a marshal makes in a lifetime? You betrayed your oath. I survived. While you were playing hero getting your wife killed, I was securing my future, and now I'm going to clean up one last mess. They drew simultaneously. 2 shots thundered in the small office. Jonah felt fire tear across his ribs, but his aim was true. Webb staggered back, looking down at the spreading red stain on his chest. You always were the better shot, Webb gasped, falling to his knees. Where's Eleanor? Jonah demanded, pressing his hand to his own wound. Webb coughed blood on his lips. Prescott has her. His ranch. Outside town. But you're too late. He's probably already... Webb fell forward and didn't move again. Jonah staggered outside where Crenshaw and several deputies had gathered, drawn by the gunshots. He quickly explained what had happened, showing them Webb's body. Jesus Christ, Crenshaw muttered. Webb was dirty. We need to get to Prescott's ranch. Now. He has Eleanor. Jonah, you're bleeding? I've bled before. Are you coming or not? Crenshaw nodded, turning to his deputies. Mount up. We ride for the Prescott ranch. And someone telegraph the federal office in Phoenix. Tell them we need backup and a new judge. Ours is about to be arrested. They rode hard through the darkness, 15 men strong. Jonah's wound burned with each movement, but he pushed through it. All he could think about was Eleanor, another woman in danger because of him, another chance to fail or redeem himself. The Prescott Ranch was a sprawling affair befitting a man of his claimed stature. But as they approached, they could see lights blazing in every window and armed men patrolling the grounds. Prescott was ready for them. He's fortified, Crenshaw observed. We go in shooting. People are going to die. Then I go in alone, Jonah said. Prescott wants me. Maybe I can trade myself for Eleanor. That's suicide. Maybe. But it might buy you time to position your men, find another way in. Before Crenshaw could protest further, Jonah was riding toward the main gate, his hands raised but ready to go for his guns. Prescott, Achi, he shouted. It's Jonah Mercer, I'm coming in to talk. Armed men emerged from cover rifles trained on him, but the gate opened and Jonah rode through feeling like he was entering the mouth of hell. Judge Theodore Prescott stood on his porch, still dressed in his judicial robes as if they were armor. He was a tall man, silver-haired, with the kind of face that inspired trust until you looked into his eyes and saw the emptiness there. Marshal Mercer, Prescott said, or should I say former Marshal. You've caused me considerable trouble. Where's Eleanor? Safe. For now. Dismount slowly. Drop your weapons. Jonah complied, though it went against every instinct. His guns hit the dirt with a dull thud. You killed Webb, Prescott observed. He drew first. No matter. He was becoming a liability anyway. Too guilty, too weak. Not like you. You're a true believer, aren't you, in justice and the law? I believe in doing what's right. Prescott laughed. How wonderfully naive. Do you know what's right, Mercer Progress? The railroad coming through, bringing civilization to this wasteland. Yes, some people have to be displaced for the greater good. Yes, some deaths are necessary, but in 10 years this will be a thriving community and no one will remember a few dead ranchers. I'll remember. Eleanor will remember. Ah yes, the crusading journalist, bring her out. Two men emerged from the house, dragging Eleanor between them. She was conscious, but beaten, her dress torn, further blood on her face. When she saw Jonah, she tried to stand straighter. I'm sorry, she called out. They were waiting. One of the men backhanded her, cutting off her words. Jonah took a step forward, but a dozen rifles swung toward him. Here's what's going to happen, Prescott said. You and Miss Grant are going to disappear. Another tragic casualty of frontier violence. Your bodies will be found in the desert, killed by bandits. Very sad, but these things happen. Crenshaw knows the truth. He has the evidence. What evidence? The documents Miss Grant hid. I'm afraid those were destroyed an hour ago. And Crenshaw. He's a good man, but he knows which battles to fight. With you and the woman gone, with Webb, unable to testify, what does he really have? Prescott was right, and they both knew it. Without Eleanor's testimony, without the documents, there was no case, just the word of a sheriff against a respected judge. However, Prescott continued, I'm not an unreasonable man. Join me, Mercer. Your reputation, your skills, they could be very useful. I could make you rich. Like you made Webb rich, right before you decided he was a liability. Prescott's smile faded. I thought not. You're too rigid, too principled. It's what got your wife killed, you know. Jonah's hands clenched into fists. Oh yes, Prescott continued. I know all about that night. How you ignored warnings because they came from a woman. How your pride, your certainty that you knew best led directly to her death. You're not a hero, Mercer. You're a fool who gets people killed. The words hit harder than any bullet because they were true. But then Jonah looked at Eleanor, saw the defiance still burning in her eyes, despite everything, and realized something. He couldn't change. The past couldn't bring back Clara or Sarah. But he could change what happened next. You're right, Jonah said quietly. I am a fool. But I'm a fool who's still standing. And you made one mistake, Prescott. What's that? You let me get this close. Jonah moved faster than thought, diving for his dropped guns as he rolled. Gunfire erupted, but he was already moving the Colt in his hand, barking. Two of Prescott's men went down. Eleanor threw herself backward, using her weight to pull her captors off balance. Then the night exploded with gunfire as Crenshaw and his men who'd been creeping closer in the darkness opened up. The battle was brief but vicious. Prescott tried to run, but Jonah's bullet caught him in the leg, sending him sprawling. When the smoke cleared, 8 of Prescott's men were dead, the rest surrendering. Jonah found Eleanor cutting her bonds with a knife she'd pulled from one of her unconscious captors. You're full of surprises, he said, helping her to her feet. So are you. That was either very brave or very stupid. Probably both. They stood there for a moment, two damaged people who'd found something unexpected in shared purpose. Then Eleanor swayed and Jonah caught her before she could fall. It's over, he said. No, she replied. Looking at Prescott being loaded into a wagon, his leg bandaged, but his political career bleeding out. Now it begins. The trial, the testimony, the truth coming out. She was right. It took 3 months for the trial. 3 months of testimony and revelations that shook the territory. Prescott was convicted, sentenced to hang for the murders he'd ordered. The railroad rerouted, avoiding the blood-stained land he'd tried to claim. Some of his associates fled to Mexico. Others faced their own trials. Marcus Cordell was finally caught trying to cross into California. He confessed to everything in exchange for life in prison instead of the noose. His testimony sealed Prescott's fate and revealed the full extent of the conspiracy, dozens of murders over 5 years, all for profit. Through it all, Eleanor was there documenting everything, making sure the truth was preserved. Her articles were picked up by papers across the country, making her reputation as a serious journalist. But she didn't leave when the story was done. There are more stories here, she told Jonah one evening as they sat on his ranch's porch watching the sunset. More truths that need telling. And that's the only reason you're staying, he asked. She looked at him, this man who'd lost everything and somehow found the strength to keep fighting. No, it's not the only reason. They were married 6 months later, a simple ceremony with Crenshaw as witness. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, they both carried too many scars for that, but it was real, built on shared pain and shared purpose. Jonah never forgot Clara never stopped loving her, but Eleanor understood that carried her own ghosts of Sarah. They didn't try to replace what they'd lost. Instead, they built something new, something that honored the dead by protecting the living. The ranch prospered. The garden Clara had started bloomed under Eleanor's care, as if the land itself had been waiting for healing. Jonah still wore a gun, still answered when the law needed him, but now he had something to come home to, someone who understood the weight he carried. On quiet nights when the stars spread across the Arizona sky like scattered diamonds, they would sit together in comfortable silence. Two people who'd walked through hell and found on the other side not paradise, but something better. A life worth living, a future worth fighting for, and the knowledge that sometimes justice and love could grow from the ashes of tragedy. The storm that had brought them together was over, but its echoes remained in the stories Eleanor wrote, in the laws that changed, because of what they'd exposed, in the lives that were saved, because two broken people refused to stop fighting for what was right. And in the garden, Clara's roses bloomed, their red petals bright as blood, bright as redemption, bright as the promise that even in the harshest desert, beautiful things could grow. The morning after their wedding, Eleanor stood in Clara's garden with dirt under her fingernails and sweat beading on her forehead, working the soil with a determination that reminded Jonah of his late wife. But where Clara had gardened with gentle patience, Eleanor attacked the earth like she was interrogating it for secrets. 6 months had passed since Prescott's execution, and the territory was still reeling from the revelations of corruption that had reached into every corner of government. "Another telegram from Phoenix," Jonah said, approaching with a yellow paper in his hand. "The new territorial governor wants to meet with you." Eleanor didn't look up from the rosebush she was pruning. "Tell him I'm busy." "You've been telling everyone you're busy for weeks now." "Because I am busy." She finally raised her eyes to meet his, and he saw the shadows there, the same ones that haunted his own reflection. "Every time I close my eyes, Jonah, I see Sarah. I see her trying to warn you, being dismissed, dying alone. And I think about all the other Sarahs out there, all the other voices no one's listening to." Jonah knelt beside her, his hand covering hers on the pruning shears. "You can't save them all." "But I can try. That's what this garden taught me. Clara tried. Even when the desert said nothing could grow here, she tried. And look." Eleanor gestured at the blooming roses, the vegetable patches, the fruit trees just beginning to bud. "She made something impossible happen." Before Jonah could respond, the sound of approaching horses made them both tense. Old habits died hard. Jonah's hand went to his gun, while Eleanor reached for the rifle she kept hidden behind the water barrel. But the rider who appeared was alone and familiar, Deputy U.S. Marshal Tom McKenna Webb's replacement. "Marshal Mercer," McKenna said, then corrected himself. "Sorry, Mr. Mercer." "Old habits." "What brings you out here, Tom?" Jonah asked, not relaxing his vigilance entirely. Trust came harder these days. McKenna dismounted, his face grim. "We've got a problem. Marcus Cordell escaped during a prison transfer 3 days ago." The words hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Eleanor's hand found Jonah's squeezing tight. "How?" Jonah asked. "Inside help. 2 guards are missing, presumed dead. Cordell had friends we didn't know about, people who weren't happy about his testimony against Prescott." McKenna pulled out a wanted poster, Cordell's face staring back at them with those dead eyes Jonah remembered too well. "Word is he's heading back to Arizona. He's got unfinished business," he said. "We think he means you." Eleanor stood, brushing dirt from her dress with sharp, angry movements. "Of course he does. Men like Cordell, they can't stand losing. Can't stand that their grand plans fell apart." "I've got men watching the main roads," McKenna continued, "but you know this territory? Cordell could be anywhere." "He'll come here," Jonah said with certainty. "He's not the type to run. He'll want to finish what he started face to face." McKenna nodded. "That's what we figured. I can post deputies here." "No." Jonah's refusal was immediate. Deputies on the ranch will just announce we're scared. If Cordell thinks we're weak, he'll strike fast and hard. Better to let him think we're unaware, draw him in on our terms. Jonah, Eleanor said, and there was steel in her voice. We're not using ourselves as bait. We're already bait. The question is whether we control the trap or walk into his. They argued about it for an hour after McKenna left Eleanor pacing the kitchen while Jonah cleaned his weapons with methodical precision. It was their first real fight as a married couple, and it had the intensity of two people who'd learned that life was too short for pulled punches. You're doing it again, Eleanor said finally. Making decisions for everyone assuming you know best. That's what got Clara. She stopped abruptly, horror crossing her face at what she'd almost said. But Jonah finished the thought for her. That's what got Clara killed. You're right. He set down the rifle he'd been cleaning. I am doing it again. So tell me, Eleanor, what would you do? You've got just as much stake in this as I do. Cordell's people killed your sister. Eleanor sat down across from him, her anger deflating into something more complex. I'd hunt him, not wait for him to come to us, but go after him. He escaped 3 days ago. He can't have gotten far without help. Someone's hiding him, feeding him information. You want to investigate. It's what I do, Jonah. You track men through the desert. I track them through their connections, their patterns. Cordell didn't have many friends left after testifying. Whoever helped him escape, whoever's helping him now, it's a small group. Jonah considered this. It went against his instincts to leave the defensive position of the ranch, but Eleanor was right. Waiting made them targets. Acting made them hunters. All right, he said. We do this together. Where do we start? Eleanor pulled out a notebook. She always had one within reach these days. During the trial, there were 3 men who testified as character witnesses for Cordell. They claimed he was forced into crime by circumstance, that Prescott manipulated him. The jury didn't buy it, but these men stood by him. One of them owns a freight company in Benson. Another runs cattle near the Mexican border. The third is dead, Jonah interrupted. Killed in a saloon fight 2 weeks ago. I heard about it in town. Convenient timing, or maybe not so convenient for him. That leaves us 2 leads. They set out the next morning, telling no one where they were going. The freight company in Benson was their first stop, a dusty operation run out of a warehouse that had seen better days. The owner, a man named Carl Hutchins, was nervous from the moment they walked in. I don't know nothing about Cordell, he said, before they'd even asked a question. Haven't seen him since the trial. We didn't say we were looking for Cordell. Eleanor observed her journalist's instincts sharp as ever. Hutchins went pale. I just assumed... why else would you be here? Maybe, Jonah said, moving closer to the sweating man. Because someone's been moving supplies south. Food, ammunition, medical supplies. The kind of things a man on the run would need. I run a legitimate business. Then you won't mind if we look at your shipping records, Eleanor said sweetly, already moving toward the ledger on his desk. Hutchins moved to stop her, but Jonah's hand on his gun made him reconsider. Eleanor flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning quickly. Interesting, she said. 3 shipments in the past week to a mining claim that's been abandoned for 2 years. Either someone's very optimistic about finding gold, or they're using it for something else. Hutchins broke then, the words spilling out in a desperate rush. He said he'd kill my family if I didn't help. Cordell, he's different now. Prison did something to him. He's not just mean anymore, he's crazy. Talks about burning the whole territory down, starting with you 2. Where's the mine? Jonah asked. Dragoon Mountains. The old Esperanza claim. But you don't want to go there. He's got at least a dozen men with him, maybe more. They're planning something big. Planning what? I don't know, I swear. But he had me ship dynamite. Lots of it. Jonah and Eleanor exchanged glances. Dynamite changed everything. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. Cordell was planning something that could kill dozens of innocent people. They left Hutchins tied up in his warehouse with a note for Marshal McKenna, then rode hard for the Dragoon Mountains. The landscape grew increasingly hostile as they climbed the cheerful desert, giving way to sharp rocks and hidden canyons. The Esperanza mine was supposedly played out years ago, but its isolation made it perfect for hiding. They found the first guard 2 miles from the mine, a lazy sentry who was more interested in his bottle than watching the trail. Jonah took him down silently, and they learned from his terrified whispers that Cordell had 18 men with him and enough dynamite to blow Tucson to hell. Tucson, Eleanor breathed. The railroad celebration. It's in 3 days. There'll be hundreds of people there, including the new governor. Cordell's going to attack the celebration, Jonah realized. Kill the governor, destroy the railroad, create enough chaos that the territory falls apart. And in that chaos, he rebuilds his empire, Eleanor finished. With Prescott's people scattered and scared, he could take over everything. They had to stop him, but 18 men in a fortified position was suicide for 2 people. They needed help, but riding back to town would take too long. Cordell might move before they could return with reinforcements. There's another way, Eleanor said, studying the mountain. The mine has to have ventilation shafts. If we could get inside without them knowing, we could sabotage the dynamite, Jonah finished. Or at least figure out their exact plan. It was dangerous, possibly foolish, but it was better than letting Cordell massacre innocent people. They waited until nightfall, then climbed the mountain's treacherous face, searching for the ventilation shafts that would give them access to the mine. They found one after an hour of searching, a narrow opening barely wide enough for a person. Eleanor went first, being smaller, with Jonah following. The descent was claustrophobic and terrifying, made worse by the voices echoing up from below. But they made it, dropping into a side tunnel that had been carved when miners still had hope of finding gold. The mine was a maze of passages, some supported by rotting timbers, others carved from solid rock. They moved carefully, following the sound of voices and the flickering light of torches. What they found in the main chamber stopped them cold. Cordell stood before a map of Tucson, marking positions with colored pins. He looked different. Prison had taken weight off him, but it had also refined his cruelty into something sharper. Around him, his men were preparing weapons and studying the map. The governor's platform will be here, Cordell was saying, pointing to a spot on the map. The dynamite wagons will be positioned here and here, hidden in the celebration supplies. When the governor starts his speech, we blow the supports. The platform collapses, taking him and every official with it. In the panic, our men in the crowd start shooting. We make it look like an Indian uprising or Mexican raiders. Doesn't matter which, as long as people are scared. What about Mercer? One of his men asked. Cordell smiled, and it was like watching a snake bare its fangs. Mercer will come. When he hears about this, his hero complex won't let him stay away. And when he does, I'll be waiting. Him and that bitch he married, they'll burn together. A fitting end, don't you think? Fire for fire. Eleanor's hand found Jonah's in the darkness, squeezing hard. They'd heard enough. They needed to get this information to McKenna, stop the plot before it could begin. But as they started to retreat, Eleanor's foot knocked loose a small stone. It clattered down into the main chamber, the sound impossibly loud in the enclosed space. What was that? One of the men asked. Check it out, Cordell ordered. All the tunnels. Now, Jonah and Eleanor ran, their footsteps echoing through the passages as shouts erupted behind them. They took turns at random, hoping to lose their pursuers in the maze. But the mine was Cordell's territory. Now he knew every passage. They burst into a chamber filled with crates, and Jonah's blood went cold. Dynamite. Enough to level a city block. And worse, some of it had been wired together, ready for transport. We have to destroy it, Eleanor said. That much dynamite in an enclosed space, it'll bring the whole mountain down. Then we'd better be outside when it goes. Footsteps were getting closer. Jonah grabbed a torch from the wall, looked at Eleanor. You run! Get to the ventilation shaft. Not without you. Eleanor. No. Her voice was fierce. We do this together, or not at all. I'm not losing another person I love to Cordell. The word hung between them, love. They hadn't said it yet, hadn't put words to what was growing between them. But there it was, acknowledged in the worst possible moment. Together then, Jonah agreed. They lit the fuse, a long one, thank God, giving them maybe 10 minutes. Then they ran like hell was chasing them, which in a way it was. Cordell's men were converging from all directions, gunfire echoing through the tunnels. Jonah fired back, trying to keep them at bay, while Eleanor led the way, her memory of the mine's layout their only hope. They reached the ventilation shaft just as Cordell himself appeared at the other end of the tunnel. For a moment, the two men locked eyes, killer and hunter, past and present revenge and justice. Then Cordell raised his gun. Jonah shoved Eleanor up into the shaft as the bullet sparked off the rock where she'd been. He fired back his shots, driving Cordell to cover, then hauled himself up after her. They climbed desperately, the shaft seeming endless, their hands bloody from the rough stone. Behind them, they could hear Cordell screaming orders, his men trying to follow. But the shaft was narrow, slow-going for anyone. They had a lead, but not much of one. They erupted from the top of the shaft and ran tumbling more than climbing down the mountainside. Behind them, Cordell emerged, his face twisted with rage. He raised his gun and Jonah turned ready to shield Eleanor with his body. The explosion came like the world ending. The mountain convulsed fire, erupting from every shaft and opening. The force of it threw them forward, tumbling down the slope in a cascade of rocks and dust. Jonah grabbed Eleanor, pulling her against him as they rolled, trying to protect her from the worst of it. When the world finally stopped moving, they lay in a heap at the mountain's base, battered and bleeding, but alive. Above them, the Esperanza mine was gone, replaced by a smoking crater. Of Cordell and his men there was no sign. "Is it over?" Eleanor asked, her voice muffled against his chest. "That part is, Jonah replied, helping her sit up. "But we still need to warn McKenna about the other men, the ones already in Tucson." They found their horses miraculously unharmed and rode through the night. Dawn was breaking as they reached Tucson, and the town was already preparing for the celebration. Bunting hung from buildings and workers were constructing the platform where the governor would speak. McKenna was at his office, and his relief at seeing them was palpable. "We heard an explosion in the mountains. Thought it might be Cordell making a statement." "It was us making one," Jonah replied, then quickly explained what they'd learned. McKenna immediately mobilized his men, searching for the hidden dynamite and Cordell's infiltrators. They found 3 wagons loaded with explosives hidden among legitimate supplies. 7 men were arrested, all bearing the snake and skull tattoo of Cordell's gang. The celebration went ahead as planned, though, with triple the security. The governor gave his speech about progress and civilization coming to the territory, unaware of how close he'd come to death. Jonah and Eleanor watched from the crowd, her hand in his, both of them scanning for threats that never materialized. "We did it," Eleanor said as the crowd dispersed. "You did it," Jonah corrected. "Your investigation, your instincts. I would have just waited at the ranch like a sitting duck. We did it together. That's what matters." They returned to the ranch as heroes, though they refused the medals the governor wanted to give them. Eleanor wrote the story for her paper, making sure the truth was known, that people understood how close they'd come to disaster. But she left out some details, their private moments, their fears, the words she'd said in the mine that still hung between them, unspoken in quieter moments. Life settled into a new rhythm. Jonah still helped McKenna with particularly dangerous criminals, but he no longer sought out violence. Eleanor continued her journalism, but focused more on stories of hope than corruption. The garden grew, and with it, their life together. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset paint the mountains red, Eleanor finally said what they'd both been thinking. "I love you, you know? Not because you saved me, not because of what we've been through. I love you because you see me not as Sarah's sister, not as a woman who needs protecting, but as myself." Jonah pulled her closer. "I love you too. Not as Clara's replacement, but as Eleanor. My Eleanor. Or Eleanor who can outshoot half the men in the territory. My Eleanor who solved a conspiracy that went to the heart of government. Your Eleanor who's terrible at cooking. My Eleanor who makes the garden bloom." They sat in comfortable silence, 2 people who'd found each other in the worst of circumstances and built something beautiful from the ashes. The ghosts were still there, Clara. Sarah, all the others who'd died, but they were peaceful now, part of the past rather than haunting the present. Then Eleanor stiffened beside him. "Jonah, look!" A rider was approaching, moving fast. As he got closer, they recognized McKenna, his face grim. "What is it?" Jonah asked, already knowing it was bad news. "We found a body in the rubble of the mine," McKenna said. 17 of Cordell's men, all accounted for, but not Cordell himself. And today a stage was robbed near Bisbee. The driver survived, said the lead robber had burn scars on his face and crazy eyes. Said he was heading for Mexico, but he left a message. McKenna handed over a piece of paper. In charred handwriting it read, "This isn't over. MC." Eleanor and Jonah looked at each other, a whole conversation in that glance. Then Eleanor stood brushing dust from her dress. "Well," she said, I suppose our quiet life will have to wait a bit longer. You don't have to come, Jonah said. This is my fight. Our fight, Eleanor corrected. Remember, together or not at all. McKenna looked between them. I can't officially sanction a pursuit into Mexico. Good thing we're not asking for official sanction, Jonah replied. They spent the night preparing cleaning weapons and gathering supplies, but they also spent it talking, planning, being together. Because they'd learned that every moment was precious, that tomorrow was never guaranteed. As dawn broke, they stood ready to ride. The garden would have to tend itself for a while. Justice was calling them south into the harsh lands where borders meant nothing, and law was what you carried in your holster. Ready? Jonah asked. Always, Eleanor replied. They mounted their horses and rode toward the rising sun, toward Mexico, toward whatever ending Cordell had planned. But they rode together, and that made all the difference. The past couldn't be changed, but the future was still unwritten, and they would write it with bullets and truth, with justice and love. Behind them the ranch stood quiet, the garden blooming in the morning light. Clara's roses were particularly beautiful that day, as if giving their blessing to the hunt. And somewhere in the distance, Marcus Cordell was running, not knowing that his time was running out. The two people who'd lost everything had found in each other the strength to never stop hunting him. The trail to Mexico was long and dangerous, but Jonah and Eleanor had traveled dangerous roads before. This time, though, they traveled them together, and that changed everything. The desert stretched endless before them, but it no longer seemed empty. It seemed full of possibility, of chances for redemption, of stories yet to be told. As they crossed the border, Eleanor reached over and took Jonah's hand, their horses walking side by side. Whatever happens, she said, I'm glad it's with you. There's no one else I'd rather face the devil with, Jonah replied. And they rode on into the harsh beauty of the Mexican desert, where somewhere a scarred madman waited, where justice delayed would finally be delivered, where two broken people would prove that sometimes love was the strongest weapon of all. The Mexican desert was a different kind of harsh than Arizona, the heat seeming to rise from the earth itself like the breath of buried demons. 3 days into their pursuit, Jonah and Eleanor found themselves in a small village called San Miguel, where the locals watched them with suspicious eyes and answered their questions with shrugs and silence. Gringos asking about other gringos usually meant trouble was coming. He was here, Eleanor said, examining the register at the village's only inn. Her finger traced over a name written 2 days prior, M. Coleman. Same initials, and look at the handwriting. The way he makes his M, it's identical to the note he left. The innkeeper, a weathered woman named Rosa, finally spoke after Eleanor placed a gold coin on the counter. The scarred man, see, he was here, but he is not alone. 3 men with him, maybe 4. They spoke of Hermosillo, of meeting others there. Did he hurt anyone? Jonah asked in Spanish, his hand unconsciously resting on his gun. Rosa's face darkened. He tried. My daughter, she serves the meals. He grabbed her, but one of his own men stopped him. There was arguing. I think even his friends fear him now. This was useful information. If Cordell's men were having doubts, if his madness was becoming too much even for outlaws, then there might be opportunities to divide them. Eleanor was already thinking along the same lines. Jonah could see it in the way her eyes sharpened the journalist in her sensing weakness in their quarry. They stayed the night in San Miguel, taking turns keeping watch. The inn's walls were thin, and through them they could hear the sounds of the village settling into sleep. Mothers singing to children, men arguing over card games, dogs barking at shadows. It was a peaceful sound, a reminder of what they were protecting by hunting Cordell. Do you ever think about it? Eleanor asked during her watch, her voice soft in the darkness. What life would be like if none of this had happened, if Sarah hadn't died, if Clara... Every day, Jonah admitted. But that way lies madness. We can't live in worlds that don't exist. No, but sometimes I wonder if we're trying so hard to avenge the dead that we're forgetting to live ourselves. Jonah sat up, moving to sit beside her at the window. Below the village square was bathed in moonlight, peaceful and timeless. Is that what you think we're doing? Forgetting to live. I think, Eleanor said slowly, that we've gotten very good at surviving, at fighting, at seeking justice. But that morning in the garden, before McKenna came, that felt like living. Just for a moment, We were just a married couple tending roses. We'll have that again, Jonah promised, taking her hand. When this is over. When this is over, there'll be something else. Another criminal, another wrong that needs righting. That's who we are, Jonah. We're drawn to justice like moths to flame. The question is whether we let it consume us. Before Jonah could answer, a sound made them both freeze. Footsteps on the stairs trying to be quiet, but not quite succeeding. Jonah drew his gun, moving to one side of the door, while Eleanor grabbed the shotgun and positioned herself by the window. The footsteps stopped outside their door. For a moment there was only silence, then the doorknob began to turn slowly. Jonah waited until the door cracked open, then yanked it wide, his gun pressed against the intruder's head. It was a boy maybe 15, his eyes wide with terror. He held a piece of paper in his shaking hand. "Please, senor, don't shoot. I have a message. The scarred man, he paid me to deliver it." Jonah took the paper, keeping his gun trained on the boy, while Eleanor lit a lamp. The message was short: "Stop following or the next village burns. You've seen what I can do with dynamite. MC." "When did he give you this?" Eleanor asked the boy in gentle Spanish. 2 hours ago, senora. He is camped 5 miles south by the old mission. He said to wait until you were asleep, but I was afraid." "How many men with him?" 6 now. 3 more joined him today. They have many guns, much ammunition, and boxes they handle very carefully. More dynamite. Of course, Cordell would have backup supplies, alternate plans. A man didn't survive as long as he had without redundancy. "You did the right thing coming to us," Eleanor told the boy, giving him another gold coin. "Now go home. Lock your doors. Stay inside tomorrow." After the boy left, they sat in the darkness discussing options. 5 miles wasn't far. They could reach the old mission before dawn, scout Cordell's position. But 6 men plus Cordell, those weren't good odds, even with surprise on their side. "We need to even the numbers," Jonah said. "Turn his men against him, maybe." Rosa said they were already having doubts. "Or we could destroy his dynamite," Eleanor suggested. "Without it, he's just another outlaw with a gun. The dynamite is what makes him truly dangerous." They decided to scout first, make decisions based on what they found. The ride to the old mission was treacherous. In the darkness, the trail little more than a goat path in places. But as the eastern sky began to lighten, they found themselves looking down at the ruins of Mission San Carlos, where Cordell had made camp. The mission had been abandoned for decades, its walls crumbling, its roof long gone. But it provided good defensive positions, and Cordell had chosen well. Guards were posted at strategic points, and in the center courtyard they could see boxes stacked under a tarp, the dynamite. "There," Eleanor whispered, pointing. "Is that Cordell?" A figure emerged from what had once been the mission's chapel. Even from a distance, they could see the burn scars that covered half his face, souvenirs from the mine explosion. He moved stiffly, obviously still in pain, but his voice carried clearly in the still morning air as he addressed his men. "Today we move to Hermosillo. The bank there has a fortune in silver payment for the mines. We take it we'll have enough to disappear forever. But if those 2 are still following us—" He didn't finish the threat, but his meaning was clear. One of his men, a younger outlaw with nervous eyes, spoke up. "Marcus, maybe we should just go. We've got enough money from the stage robbery. Why risk—" Cordell's gun was in his hand before anyone could blink, the shot echoing off the mission walls. The young outlaw crumpled, clutching his shoulder. "Anyone else want to question me?" Cordell asked calmly, as if he hadn't just shot one of his own men. "No good. Saddle up. We ride in an hour." The other outlaws moved to obey, but Jonah could see the fear in their movements, the way they avoided looking at their wounded companion or at Cordell. This wasn't loyalty anymore. It was terror. "He's losing control," Eleanor observed. "His men will abandon him the first chance they get." "Or he'll kill them all first," Jonah replied. "We need to act now while they're still scattered, preparing to leave." They circled around to approach from the mission's blind side, where the wall had collapsed completely. The guard there was the wounded outlaw left to watch this seemingly unimportant approach while nursing his shoulder. He didn't see Jonah until it was too late, the rifle butt connecting solidly with his temple. Eleanor was already moving toward the dynamite, her knife out to cut the fuses, when shouts erupted from the other side of the mission. They'd been spotted by another guard, and now the entire camp was mobilizing. "Get the dynamite. Jonah shouted, turning to face the outlaws rushing toward them. His rifle barked once, twice, dropping 2 men before they could reach cover. Eleanor worked frantically, pulling apart the carefully arranged explosive setup. Some of the dynamite she threw into the mission's old well, some she scattered, making it useless for any coordinated attack. But there was so much of it, and time was running out. Cordell appeared like a demon from smoke, his scarred face twisted with rage, both guns blazing. Jonah dove behind a fallen pillar as bullets chipped stone around him. They exchanged fire, neither able to get a clear shot, while Cordell's remaining men tried to flank them. "Eleanor, we need to go," Jonah called out. "Almost done." She had found something in the supplies. A map documents. She stuffed them into her shirt, then grabbed one stick of dynamite, lighting its fuse. "Everyone get down!" She threw it into the pile of remaining explosives, then ran. Jonah provided covering fire, backing toward their horses as Eleanor reached him. They mounted just as the dynamite detonated, not all of it, but enough to blow apart the mission's remaining wall and send everyone diving for cover. In the chaos and dust, they escaped riding hard as gunfire erupted behind them, but they weren't heading back to San Miguel. Eleanor had seen something on that map, something that changed everything. "He's not going to Hermosillo," she said as they finally stopped to rest the horses miles later. That was a lie for his men. "Look." She spread the map on a rock. "He's marked a route to the coast to a place called Puerto Libertad. There's a ship symbol drawn there and a date tomorrow." He's leaving Mexico, Jonah realized. Probably had this planned all along. Rob the stage for traveling money, use the bank robbery story to keep his men in line, then abandon them and sail away. But sail where? Eleanor studied the documents she'd grabbed. These are letters coded, but wait, I've seen this code before. Sarah used something similar in her journalism, a simple substitution cipher. She worked on the code while Jonah kept watch. The sun climbed higher, the heat becoming oppressive, but Eleanor didn't notice, lost in the puzzle. Finally, she looked up, her face pale despite the sun. "China," she said. "He's got passage booked to China where no one will ever find him. And Jonah, these letters, they're from someone in San Francisco, someone with power. They're not just helping him escape, they're paying him. $20,000 deposited in a Hong Kong bank." "Payment for what?" "For killing us. Specifically us. Someone wants us dead badly enough to pay a fortune for it." The implications were staggering. This wasn't just about Cordell's revenge anymore. Someone else, someone with real power and money, wanted them eliminated. But why? What did they know, or what had they done that was worth $20,000? "We have to stop him from reaching that ship," Jonah said. "If he gets to China, he's gone forever, and whoever's paying him will just hire someone else. Puerto Libertad is 2 days' ride from here, but if we cut through the mountains instead of following the road, we might make it in one." It was dangerous. The mountains were Apache territory, officially at peace but still hostile to outsiders. But they had no choice. They set out immediately, pushing their horses as hard as they dared. The mountain trail was treacherous, barely visible in places. They had to dismount and lead the horses through narrow passes where one wrong step meant a fatal fall. As night fell, they were forced to make camp in a small cave, both of them exhausted. "I've been thinking," Eleanor said as they shared their meager supplies. "Whoever wrote those letters, they knew details about us. Where we lived, our habits, that we'd come after Cordell. This isn't a stranger, Jonah. This is someone we know." The thought was chilling. They'd already dealt with betrayal from Webb, from Prescott. To think there was another enemy hidden watching them, it made Jonah's skin crawl. "After Clara died," Jonah said slowly, "I made a lot of enemies. Men I put away, their families' associates. Any of them could—" "No," Eleanor interrupted. "This is about both of us. The letters specifically mention me, call me the meddling journalist. This is about something we uncovered together during the Prescott investigation." They spent hours going through possibilities, but without more information, they were just guessing. Finally exhausted, they took turns sleeping, each keeping watch over the other. At dawn, they were moving again. The trail down the mountain was easier, but still took precious time. When they finally saw Puerto Libertad in the distance, the sun was already past its zenith. The small port town was busy, despite the heat, with fishing boats coming in, and a larger vessel, a steamship, waiting at the dock. "That's got to be his ship," Eleanor said, studying it through Jonah's field glasses. "The Empress of Shanghai, according to the name on the side." They could see activity on the dock cargo being loaded, passengers beginning to board, but no sign of Cordell yet. He'll wait until the last minute, Jonah said. Less time exposed, less chance of being spotted. They found a position on a hill overlooking the town, settling in to wait. The afternoon dragged on the heat, making everything shimmer like a mirage. Then, as the ship's whistle sounded what was obviously a final boarding call, they saw him. Cordell emerged from a cantina near the dock, but he wasn't alone. Two men flanked him, and they weren't his usual caliber of outlaw. These men moved like professionals, like bodyguards or military men. They escorted Cordell toward the ship with practiced efficiency. "Those aren't his men," Eleanor said. "Look at their clothes they're bearing. Those are Americans and expensive ones." Whoever's paying him sent protection, Jonah realized. They really want him to make that ship. They had minutes at most. Once Cordell was aboard, he was gone. Jonah made a quick decision. "You circle around to the other side of the dock," he told Eleanor. "If shooting starts, people will run that way. Try to keep them from boarding. And you, I'm going to have a conversation with Mr. Cordell." Eleanor grabbed his arm. "Jonah, those bodyguards—" "I know, but this ends today one way or another." She kissed him, then fierce and quick. "Don't you dare die on me, Jonah Mercer." "Same to you, Eleanor Mercer." They separated, Eleanor disappearing into the crowd while Jonah walked straight toward the dock. No sneaking, no subterfuge. He wanted Cordell to see him coming, and Cordell did. The scarred man stopped halfway up the gangplank, his burned face twisting into something that might have been a smile. He said something to his bodyguards, who immediately moved to intercept Jonah. "That's far enough," one of them said, his hand inside his coat where a gun obviously rested. "I'm here to talk to Cordell," Jonah said calmly. "Man to man, or is he too much of a coward to face me without hired help?" The taunt worked. Cordell came back down the gangplank, his own hand on his gun. "Mercer, I should have known you'd follow me to hell itself." "Funny you mention hell. That's where you're going, just not on that ship." Cordell laughed, a harsh sound like breaking glass. "You going to arrest me, Marshal?" "Oh wait, you're not a marshal anymore. You're just a broken man playing hero." "Maybe. But I'm a broken man who knows about San Francisco, about the $20,000, about whoever's pulling your strings." For the first time, uncertainty flickered in Cordell's eyes. "You don't know anything. I know enough. And when you're dead, I'll know more. Your employer will have to find another pet killer unless—" Jonah paused as if thinking. "Unless you want to make a deal. Tell me who hired you and I'll let you get on that ship." It was a lie, of course. Jonah would never let Cordell escape. But he needed information, and Cordell's greed might overcome his caution. "You'd let me go?" Cordell asked suspiciously. "Claire's dead. Sarah's dead. The Hendersons are dead. Nothing I do brings them back. But whoever hired you, they're the real evil here. You're just the weapon. I want the hand that wielded you." Cordell considered this, and Jonah could see him weighing options. Then his eyes shifted, looking past Jonah, and his scarred face split into a genuine smile. "Too late for deals, Mercer." Jonah heard the gun cock behind him. He spun, drawing and firing in one motion, taking down one bodyguard, but the other's bullet caught him in the side, spinning him to the ground. His gun flew from his hand, skittering across the dock. Cordell stood over him, gun pointed at his head. "You know what your problem is, Mercer. You still think there are rules. You still think justice means something. But out here in the real world, there's only power and those too weak to take it." A shot rang out, but it wasn't Cordell's gun. The scarred man staggered, looking down at the spreading red stain on his chest. Behind him, Eleanor stood with a smoking rifle, her face carved from stone. "You talk too much," she said. Cordell fell to his knees, his gun dropping from nerveless fingers. He looked up at Jonah, his eyes already glazing. "San Francisco," he gasped. The judge's brother." Then he pitched forward and moved no more. Eleanor was at Jonah's side, immediately pressing her scarf against his wound. Around them, chaos erupted as local authorities arrived, drawn by the gunfire. The ship's captain was shouting about schedules, passengers were screaming, and somewhere a woman was crying. "The judge's brother," Eleanor repeated. Prescott had a brother in San Francisco, a banker named William Prescott. "He wants revenge for his brother's execution," Jonah said through gritted teeth. This won't end with Cordell. The Mexican authorities wanted to arrest them, but the American bodyguards had diplomatic papers that complicated everything. In the end, a hefty bribe from Eleanor's hidden funds convinced the local sheriff that it had been self-defense, which it essentially was. A local doctor more used to treating fishing injuries than gunshot wounds did his best with Jonah's injury. The bullet had passed through, cleanly missing anything vital, but Jonah had lost a lot of blood. He would need rest time to heal. They took a room at the town's only hotel, Eleanor standing guard while Jonah recovered. She used the time to write documenting everything that had happened, preparing articles that would expose William Prescott's involvement. But she also wrote letters to McKenna, to Crenshaw, to everyone who might help protect them from whatever came next. On the third day, Jonah was strong enough to sit up, though Eleanor wouldn't let him do more than that. "We should go home," she said. "Back to the ranch. Let McKenna handle William Prescott." "You know it won't be that simple," Jonah replied. "Men like William Prescott don't get arrested on the word of a dying outlaw. He'll have alibis, lawyers, protection." "Then what do we do?" "We gather evidence, real evidence. Those letters you found, they're a start, but we need more. We need to prove the connection between William and Cordell, prove the money transfer, prove the conspiracy." Eleanor nodded slowly. "That means going to San Francisco. Eventually. But first we heal. We plan, we make sure that when we move against William Prescott, he can't escape like his brother almost did." They stayed in Puerto Libertad for another week, Jonah growing stronger each day. Eleanor used the time to research sending telegrams to contacts in San Francisco, slowly building a picture of William Prescott. He was rich, influential, connected to powerful people, but he was also arrogant, convinced his money made him untouchable. "He's already hired someone else," Eleanor said one evening, reading a coded telegram from a journalist friend. "A gunman named Cole Barrett. He's supposed to be even worse than Cordell." Jonah felt the old familiar weight settling on his shoulders. It would never end, not really. There would always be another threat, another enemy, another fight. But looking at Eleanor, seeing the determination in her eyes that matched his own, he realized something. "We could run," he said. "Disappear. Take new names, start over somewhere they'd never find us." Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. "Is that what you want?" "I want you safe. I want us to have a life that isn't about violence and revenge." "But that's not who we are," Eleanor said gently. "We're fighters, Jonah. We see injustice, and we can't walk away. Even if we ran, we'd end up fighting someone else's battles because that's our nature." She was right, and they both knew it. They were who they were, broken people who'd found purpose in pursuing justice, who'd found each other in the midst of violence and somehow built love from shared loss. "Then we go to San Francisco," Jonah said. "We finish this. Together," Eleanor added. "Always together." As they began planning their next move, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows across the street. Cole Barrett was already there, already watching, already planning. William Prescott had been very specific in his instructions. Make them suffer first, then kill them slowly. Barrett smiled in the darkness. He did so enjoy his work. The next morning, Jonah and Eleanor left Puerto Libertad, heading north toward the American border and ultimately San Francisco. They thought they were hunters, but they were also prey. The game was far from over. As they rode, Eleanor reached over and took Jonah's hand, squeezing it gently. Whatever came next, whatever battles they had to fight, they would face them as they'd faced everything else together, unflinching and unafraid. Behind them, Puerto Libertad faded into the distance, taking with it Marcus Cordell's body and the end of one chapter of their story. Ahead lay San Francisco William Prescott and Cole Barrett. Ahead lay more danger, more violence, more tests of their resolve. But also ahead lay the possibility of final justice, of ending the cycle of revenge that had begun with Clara's death. And perhaps, just perhaps, ahead lay the quiet life they both claimed not to want, but secretly dreamed of, a life where Eleanor's garden could grow undisturbed, where Jonah's guns could gather dust, where love could flourish without the constant shadow of death. The sun climbed higher, burning away the morning mist, revealing the long road ahead. They had miles to go before they could wrest battles, to fight before they could claim peace. But they rode on anyway, because that's what they did. They endured. They fought, and they never ever gave up. The train to San Francisco rattled through the California countryside, each mile taking them deeper into enemy territory. Jonah's wound had healed enough for travel, though Eleanor noticed him wince when the train took particularly rough turns. They'd chosen the train over horseback for speed, but also because it offered crowds to disappear into crowds that might slow down Cole Barrett if he was following them. "He's 3 cars back," Eleanor murmured, not looking up from the book she was pretending to read. "Same man who was watching us at the station in Los Angeles." Jonah didn't turn around, trusting Eleanor's observation. She'd developed an uncanny ability to spot surveillance during their time together, a skill that had saved their lives more than once. Description: tall, lean, dressed like a cattleman, but his boots are too new. Scar through his left eyebrow. He's trying too hard to look casual. That didn't sound like the descriptions they'd gathered of Cole Barrett, who was supposedly a giant of a man with prematurely white hair, which meant William Prescott had sent multiple hunters, or Barrett had hired local help. "We get off at the next stop," Jonah decided. "Make him follow us, see if he's alone." The next stop was Gilroy, a small farming town that smelled of garlic and horse manure. They disembarked casually, Eleanor taking Jonah's arm like any traveling couple. But once they were away from the platform, they moved quickly, ducking into an alley between 2 warehouses. Their shadow followed just as expected. But he was smarter than most, hanging back, using the crowd for cover. It wasn't until he turned into the alley that he realized his mistake. Jonah had him against the wall gun pressed to his ribs before the man could reach for his weapon. "Easy decision here, friend. Tell us who sent you, or I put a hole in you and we leave you for the coyotes." The man's eyes darted to Eleanor, perhaps hoping for sympathy from a woman. He found none. Her derringer was aimed steadily at his head, her expression cold as winter stone. "Barrett hired me," the man said quickly. $50 to follow you, report where you're staying in San Francisco." "Where's Barrett now?" Eleanor asked. "Already there. Setting something up," he said. "Didn't tell me what." Jonah searched the man, finding a telegram in his pocket. It was from San Francisco, simple and chilling. "Package arriving tomorrow. Prepare the welcome party. W.P." William Prescott knew they were coming. "You're going to send a telegram," Jonah told their captive. "You're going to tell Barrett we got off in San Jose instead, that we're heading for Sacramento. He'll kill me if he finds out I lied. I'll kill you right now if you don't." The arithmetic of survival was simple, and the man chose the option that gave him more time. They watched him send the false telegram. Then Jonah knocked him unconscious with his gun butt. They tied him up in the alley, knowing he'd be found eventually, but hopefully not soon enough to matter. "We need to change our approach," Eleanor said as they walked back toward the train station. "If Prescott knows we're coming, San Francisco is a trap." "Every city's a trap when your enemy owns half of it," Jonah replied. "But we knew this wouldn't be easy." They didn't get back on the train. Instead, they hired horses and took the back roads, adding a day to their journey, but avoiding the obvious route. As they rode, Eleanor pulled out the research she'd compiled on William Prescott. "He owns 3 banks, has interests in 2 shipping companies, and sits on the board of the Southern Pacific Railroad," she read from her notes. "His mansion is in Nob Hill, but he also has offices downtown. Married, 2 children, regular attendee at the Methodist Church. A pillar of the community," Jonah said bitterly, "just like his brother was." "There's more. I contacted a friend at the San Francisco Chronicle. William Prescott has been buying judges just like his brother did. But he's smarter about it. Nothing on paper, everything done through intermediaries. So even if we could prove he hired Cordell, he'd claim ignorance, say someone was using his name." "Unless we can get him to confess," Eleanor said, "or unless we find his records. Every man like him keeps records they can't help themselves. They need to track their crimes like accountants track profits." They camped that night in an abandoned barn, taking turns on watch. During Eleanor's shift, she heard Jonah talking in his sleep, calling out Clara's name. It didn't hurt anymore hearing him dream of his first wife. Eleanor understood that love didn't die just because the person did. She had her own ghosts, her own names she called out in the darkness. The next day brought them to the outskirts of San Francisco, the city sprawling before them like a beast made of wood and stone and ambition. The bay sparkled in the sunlight, ships crowding the harbor, while smoke from 1,000 chimneys turned the air gray. "Where do we start?" Eleanor asked. With the only advantage we have left, surprise. Prescott knows we're coming, but he doesn't know when or how. We need information before we make any moves. They found lodging in Chinatown, a boarding house run by an elderly Chinese woman who asked no questions when paid in gold. The room was small but clean, with a view of the street that would let them see anyone approaching. That evening, Eleanor went out alone despite Jonah's protests. A woman shopping raises no suspicions, she argued. A couple together might be recognized. She returned 2 hours later with supplies and information. Barrett's staying at the Palace Hotel, living like a king on Prescott's money. And there's something else. Prescott is hosting a charity ball tomorrow night. All of San Francisco society will be there. Including the judges, he owns the police, he's bought the politicians in his pocket, Jonah mused. It's perfect cover for a meeting. He could plan our murders in the middle of a waltz and no one would know. Or, Eleanor said, a dangerous glint in her eye. It's the perfect opportunity to get close to him. Crowds work both ways, they hide the hunter as well as the prey. You're not suggesting we walk into the middle of his party. I'm suggesting we get invited properly. My editor at the Philadelphia Inquirer has connections here. A telegram from him could get us press credentials, make us legitimate guests. It was audacious, borderline insane. But it was also unexpected, which might be their only advantage. Jonah found himself nodding once again, amazed by Eleanor's combination of intelligence and fearlessness. The next day was spent in preparation. Eleanor's editor came through with the credentials along with a warning to be careful. Jonah acquired appropriate clothing from a tailor who specialized in quick work for steep prices. They studied the layout of Prescott's mansion, memorized faces of his associates, planned escape routes. As evening fell, they dressed in their finery, Eleanor in a borrowed blue gown that brought out her eyes, Jonah in a black suit that concealed his shoulder holster reasonably well. Looking in the mirror, they almost looked like they belonged in high society. Ready to dance with the devil? Eleanor asked, pinning a small knife inside her corset. As long as you're my partner, Jonah replied, checking his derringer one last time. The Prescott mansion blazed with light carriages arriving in a steady stream to discharge San Francisco's elite. Jonah and Eleanor joined the flow, their press credentials getting them past the doorman without question. Inside the opulence was overwhelming crystal chandeliers, marble floors, paintings that belonged in museums. William Prescott stood at the center of it all, holding court like a king. He looked nothing like his brother, where Theodore had been tall and austere. William was short and soft, with the satisfied look of a man who'd never missed a meal or lost a fight that money couldn't win. There, Eleanor whispered, by the window. That's Barrett. Cole Barrett was everything they'd heard, massive, white-haired, despite appearing to be only in his 40s, with dead eyes that scanned the crowd constantly. He wasn't trying to blend in. He stood like a wolf among sheep, daring anyone to challenge him. He knows we're here, Jonah said. Look at how he's positioned. He can see all the entrances. Then we give him what he expects. You go left, I go right. Make him choose who to watch. They separated, circulating through the crowd. Eleanor played her role perfectly, the visiting journalist eager to interview San Francisco's leading citizens. She even managed to get close to William Prescott, asking him about his charitable work while his wife beamed beside him. And what brings you to San Francisco, miss? Prescott asked, his piggy eyes studying her with more interest than was proper. Grant. Eleanor Grant from the Philadelphia Inquirer. I'm writing about the influence of civic leaders in shaping Western cities. Something flickered in Prescott's expression at her name. Grant? Any relation to the Grant sisters of Arizona? I heard there was some unfortunate business down there. My cousins, Eleanor lied smoothly. Distant cousins. Very tragic what happened to them. Yes, tragic. Prescott agreed, though his smile suggested he found it anything but. You must be careful, Miss Grant. The West can be dangerous for women who ask too many questions. It was a threat barely veiled. Eleanor smiled back sweetly. How fortunate, then, that men like you are working to civilize it. Across the room, Jonah had gotten himself into a conversation with a group of judges pretending to be a cattle buyer interested in legal precedents for water rights. But his attention was on Barrett, who'd started moving through the crowd with purpose. The moment came when Eleanor was interviewing the police commissioner. Barrett approached from behind her, his hand reaching inside his coat. Jonah moved instantly, intercepting Barrett before he could reach Eleanor, their collision looking accidental to most observers. "Pardon me," Jonah said loudly, steadying himself against Barrett's massive frame. Barrett's eyes locked with his recognition flashing between them. "Mercer," he said quietly, "you've got balls showing up here." "We need to talk," Jonah replied equally quietly. "Outside. Unless you want to start a gunfight in the middle of your boss's party." Barrett considered this, then nodded toward a side door. "After you." They walked out onto a terrace overlooking the garden, the sounds of the party muffled behind them. Barrett didn't waste time with pretense, his gun appearing in his hand. "Prescott wants you dead slow," he said, "but I'm thinking quick works just as well." "You kill me here now with 100 witnesses inside, and even Prescott's money won't save you from the gallows," Jonah pointed out. "Maybe. But you'll still be dead." "True. But then you'll never know what I did with the documents." Barrett's gun didn't waver, but his expression shifted. "What documents?" "The ones from Cordell's camp, letters between him and Prescott, details about payment plans. Everything needed to destroy William Prescott completely. You kill me, my wife releases them to every newspaper in the country." It was a partial lie. They had some documents, but not enough to destroy Prescott. But Barrett didn't know that. "You're bluffing." "Maybe. Want to bet your employer's life on it, because if those documents go public, Prescott won't need you anymore. He'll be too busy trying to stay out of prison. And men like him, when they fall, they take everyone down with them." Barrett was thinking now, calculating. "What do you want?" "A meeting with Prescott. Alone. Let him and I settle this like men. He doesn't get his hands dirty. He did when he ordered his brother's enemies killed, when he paid for my wife's murder." Jonah let real anger creep into his voice. "I want to look him in the eyes when I kill him." Barrett actually smiled at that. "You know what, I believe you. You're just stupid enough to think you can walk in here and execute one of the richest men in California." He lowered his gun slightly. "But it's not my call. Wait here." Barrett went back inside. Jonah watched through the windows as the big man whispered in Prescott's ear. The banker's face went red, then white. He said something to his wife, then walked toward the terrace. William Prescott stepped outside Barrett, flanking him. Up close, Jonah could see the family resemblance to Theodore, the same cruel eyes, the same weak chin disguised by careful grooming. "Mr. Mercer," Prescott said, "I understand you have something of mine. I have evidence of your crimes. Just like your brother, you thought money made you untouchable." Prescott's composure cracked slightly. "My brother was a great man brought down by lesser people. Jealous, grasping people who couldn't stand to see someone rise above them. Your brother was a murderer who killed families for their land. He was building something, creating civilization from chaos, and you destroyed him for it. You and that meddling bitch you married." The mask was falling now, revealing the real William Prescott. Jonah pressed on. "So you hired Cordell to kill us. $20,000 to a mad dog. Cordell was a tool, nothing more. And apparently a defective one since you're still breathing." Prescott stepped closer, his voice dropping. "But there are other tools, better ones. You can't watch your back forever, Mercer. One day, maybe tomorrow, maybe next year, someone will put a bullet in your head. And then they'll do the same to your wife, but slower. I'll make sure of that." "No," said Eleanor's voice from the doorway. "You won't." She stood there with the police commissioner and two other officers, her hand holding something that made Prescott go pale, a small recording device, one of the new Edison phonographs modified for portability. "Everything," she said calmly. "Your confession to hiring Cordell, your threats against us all recorded. The commissioner here is very interested in what you had to say." Prescott looked at Barrett, expecting the gunman to act. But Barrett stepped back, hands raised slightly. "You didn't pay me enough to fight the whole police force, Prescott." "Oh, you set me up," Prescott snarled at Jonah. "No," Jonah replied. "You set yourself up the day you decided to take revenge for your brother. He died because he was a murderer. You're going to prison for the same reason." The arrest was swift and dramatic. Prescott tried to run, but the officers were ready. The party erupted in chaos as their host was dragged away in handcuffs, screaming about lawyers and revenge. The scandal would rock San Francisco society for months. Barrett watched it all with professional detachment, then turned to Jonah. You played that well, but this isn't over. Prescott has friends, people who won't be happy about this. Are you threatening us? No, just observing. I'm a businessman, Mercer. Prescott's checks won't clear now, so our business is done. But there are others who might want to pick up where he left off. Barrett tipped his hat to Eleanor. Watch your backs. He disappeared into the night, a professional killer who knew when to cut his losses. Jonah had a feeling they'd hear of Cole Barrett again, but hopefully not as an enemy. The next few days were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, newspaper interviews, and revelations. Eleanor's stories ran on front pages across the country. The Edison recording, while not legally admissible in court, had been enough to prompt a thorough investigation. They found more evidence in Prescott's home office, detailed records of bribes, murders, and conspiracies that would ensure he never saw freedom again. But on the fourth day, as they prepared to leave San Francisco, Eleanor made a discovery that chilled them both. Hidden in Prescott's papers was correspondence with someone identified only as the patron. Look at this, Eleanor said, spreading the letters on their hotel bed. Prescott wasn't the top of this pyramid. Someone else was funding him, directing him. Someone with plans that go far beyond just revenge. The letters referenced other operations in other cities, Denver, Kansas City, even Chicago. A network of corruption that made the Prescott brothers look like small-time criminals. This patron, Jonah said slowly, whoever they are, they're trying to control the entire western expansion, every major railroad route, every growing city. And we just destroyed one of their key pieces, Eleanor added, which means they'll be coming for us. They looked at each other, the weight of this new threat settling on their shoulders. They thought they were ending something with William Prescott's arrest. Instead, they'd apparently started something much larger. We could still run, Jonah offered, though his heart wasn't in it. Eleanor shook her head. We've come too far to run now. Besides, someone needs to stop this patron, whoever they are. It won't be easy. This enemy has resources we can't imagine reach. We can't match. But we have something they don't, Eleanor said, taking his hand. We have each other, and we have the truth. They left San Francisco the next morning, taking a circuitous route back to Arizona. They needed to regroup, plan, figure out how to fight an enemy who might be anyone anywhere. The train carried them through mountains and deserts, past growing towns and dying ones, through the America that was being shaped by forces they were only beginning to understand. I've been thinking, Eleanor said as they watched the landscape roll by. The patron needs the chaos to profit from it. Every murder, every land grab, it all serves to concentrate power and wealth. But what if we could expose the pattern, show people what's really happening? You want to take this public. Information is a weapon, Jonah. Maybe the best weapon against someone who operates in shadows. It was a good plan, but it would take time, resources, and allies they didn't have yet. Still, it was a start. They would return to their ranch, but not to hide. They would make it a base of operations, a place to gather information and plan their campaign against this shadowy patron. As they crossed into Arizona, Jonah felt something he hadn't experienced in years, not just purpose, but hope. Yes, they faced a dangerous enemy. Yes, the odds were against them, but they'd faced long odds before and survived. Whatever happens, he told Eleanor as their ranch came into view, I want you to know something. These past months with you, despite all the violence and danger, they've been the best of my life since Clara died. You brought me back to life, Eleanor. She leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. You saved me too, Jonah. Not just from Cordell, but from becoming consumed by revenge for Sarah. Together we found something better than vengeance. Justice, love, and purpose, and the strength to keep fighting even when the enemy seems invincible. They arrived at the ranch as the sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of gold and red. The garden had grown wild in their absence, but it had survived. Clara's roses still bloomed and new growth pushed up through the desert soil. That evening, as they sat on the porch planning their next moves, a rider approached. It was Marshal McKenna, and his face was grim. Glad you're back, he said without preamble. We've got problems. 3 judges have been murdered in the past week, all ones who refuse to play ball with the corrupt system. Someone's cleaning house, eliminating anyone who might oppose them. The patron? Eleanor said quietly. McKenna looked surprised. You know about that? We found references in Prescott's papers. Someone bigger is behind all this. Then you know more than most. But knowing and stopping are 2 different things. This patron, whoever they are, they're not playing games. Those judges, they were killed in different ways, but each murder had a message. One was strangled with telegraph wire. He'd been investigating communication monopolies. Another was drowned in ink. He'd been reviewing newspaper consolidations. The third was buried alive in silver coins. He'd opposed certain mining claims. Symbolic murders, Jonah said. The patron wants people to know these aren't random killings. They're demonstrations of power. And warnings, Eleanor added, to anyone else who might oppose them. McKenna nodded. Which brings me to why I'm here. The federal government is finally taking notice. They're putting together a task force completely off the books. Secret investigators, protected witnesses, the works. They want you both involved. It was an opportunity, but also a danger. Official involvement meant resources and support, but it also meant rules and oversight. And if the patron had people inside the government, which seemed likely, it meant exposure. We need to think about it, Jonah said. Don't think too long, McKenna warned. The patron is accelerating their timeline. Something big is coming, and we need all the help we can get to stop it. After McKenna left, Jonah and Eleanor sat in the darkness, each lost in thought. The stakes had never been higher. They were no longer fighting a single enemy, but an entire system of corruption. The patron represented everything wrong with the rapid expansion of America. Greed, unchecked power, uncontrolled progress at the cost of human lives. We have to do it, Eleanor said finally. Join the task force. We can't fight this alone. I know, Jonah agreed, but we do it our way. No blind trust, no assuming anyone is clean. We watch our backs, and we watch each other's. Together. Eleanor said the word that had become their talisman. Always together. That night they made love with a desperate passion, knowing that tomorrow would bring new dangers. In the darkness, they held each other, 2 damaged souls who'd found strength in their union. Outside, the desert wind blew, carrying the scent of sage and the promise of storms to come. When morning arrived, they were ready. They sent word to McKenna accepting the position with the task force. Then they began preparing for war. A different kind of war fought with information and investigation as much as bullets. Eleanor set up a communication network, reaching out to journalists and reformers across the country. Jonah organized security for the ranch, knowing it might become a target. Together, they studied every scrap of information about the murders, the corrupted officials, the pattern of conquest disguised as progress. Days turned into weeks as they worked slowly, building a picture of the patron's organization. It was vast, reaching into every major industry, railroads, mining, cattle banking. The patron seemed to have a hand in everything that made money in the expanding West. Then Eleanor found something that changed everything. Hidden in the financial records of multiple companies was a single name that appeared again and again: Patricia Ashford. A widow from Boston who'd inherited her husband's shipping fortune and had been quietly investing in Western enterprises for years. A woman, Eleanor breathed. The patron is a woman. It made sense in a twisted way. Who would suspect a respectable widow of being a criminal mastermind? She could move through society freely, her gender making her invisible to men who couldn't imagine a woman wielding such power. Patricia Ashford, Jonah said, testing the name. She's supposed to be a philanthropist, funds orphanages, churches, hospitals. Perfect cover, Eleanor noted. Who investigates someone who gives so generously to charity. They had a name now, a target. But Patricia Ashford was no ordinary enemy. She had wealth, influence, and an organization that spanned the continent. Taking her down would require more than bullets or even justice. It would require destroying the very system she'd built. This is bigger than us, Jonah said. Yes, Eleanor agreed, but every empire falls eventually. We just need to find the right pressure point. As they planned their campaign against Patricia Ashford, neither of them noticed the telegram that had arrived at the town's office, addressed to them but not yet delivered. It was from Boston, from Patricia Ashford herself. My dear Mr. and Mrs. Mercer, it read, I understand you've taken an interest in my business affairs. How delightful. I do so enjoy meeting interesting people. I'll be in Arizona next month for the opening of a new hospital I'm funding. Perhaps we could have tea. I promise it will be an illuminating experience. Yours in anticipation, Patricia Ashford. The patron knew they were coming, and she was inviting them in. The telegram sat on their kitchen table like a coiled rattlesnake, its words seeming to pulse with hidden venom. Eleanor read it aloud for the third time, her voice tight with controlled anger. She's mocking us, Jonah. This woman murders judges and she invites us to tea like we're old friends. Or she's supremely confident, Jonah replied, studying the telegram's precise handwriting. Patricia Ashford didn't build an empire by being careless. This invitation is calculated. A trap. Almost certainly, but also an opportunity. She wants to meet face to face for a reason. Eleanor stood and paced to the window, looking out at Clara's garden, where the roses bloomed despite the desert heat. Every instinct tells me we should ignore this, continue building our case against her from a distance. But she'll be here in Arizona, away from her Boston stronghold. Maybe that makes her vulnerable. The next 3 weeks were spent in meticulous preparation. Through the federal task force's resources, they gathered every scrap of information available about Patricia Ashford. She was 53 years old, widowed at 30, when her husband's ship went down in a storm that many suspected wasn't entirely natural. She'd inherited his fortune and multiplied it tenfold through investments that seemed to anticipate every major development in Western expansion. Look at this pattern, Eleanor said one evening, spreading documents across their table. Every time she invests in a region, violent incidents follow within months. Ranchers murdered, claims disputed, local officials corrupted or killed. Then her companies move in and buy everything at reduced prices. She's weaponizing chaos, Jonah observed, creating it, controlling it, profiting from it. Marshal McKenna arrived 2 days before Ashford was due in Arizona, bringing disturbing news. 3 of our task force members have disappeared. No bodies, no ransom demands, just gone. And their families received gifts the next day, expensive jewelry for the wives' toys for the children, all with cards signed PA. She's showing us she can reach anyone, Eleanor said, that she knows everything about us. There's more, McKenna continued reluctantly. I got a visit from a federal judge yesterday. He strongly suggested I reassign you both to other duties, said your investigation was becoming an embarrassment to certain powerful people. Which judge? Jonah asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. Judge Morrison. He's clean as far as we know, but his daughter just got accepted to a prestigious Boston finishing school, full scholarship from an anonymous benefactor. The web was vast and intricate. Patricia Ashford didn't just buy people. She ensnared them with kindness, with opportunities, with gifts that came with invisible strings attached. By the time they realized they were trapped, it was too late. The day of Ashford's arrival, Tucson buzzed with excitement. The new hospital she was funding would be the finest medical facility west of the Mississippi. Local dignitaries planned elaborate welcomes. The newspaper ran a glowing profile of the generous widow from Boston who cared so deeply about frontier communities. Jonah and Eleanor attended the hospital's dedication ceremony, blending into the crowd of well-wishers. When Patricia Ashford emerged from her private railway car, she wasn't what they expected. Rather than the severe matron they'd imagined, she was elegantly beautiful, with silver hair arranged perfectly and intelligent gray eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She moved through the crowd like a queen, dispensing smiles and kind words that seemed genuinely warm. She's good, Eleanor murmured. Very good. The best monsters always are, Jonah replied. As if she'd heard them across the crowded platform, Patricia Ashford's eyes found theirs. She smiled an expression that didn't reach those calculating eyes and began moving toward them, the crowd parting before her like water. Mr. and Mrs. Mercer, she said warmly, extending a gloved hand. How wonderful to finally meet you. I've heard so much about your adventures. Mrs. Ashford, Jonah said carefully, briefly, taking her hand. Please call me Patricia. After all, we have so much in common. I doubt that, Eleanor said coldly. Patricia's smile widened. Oh, but we do, my dear. We're both women who refuse to accept the limitations placed upon us. You became a journalist when women were supposed to be silent. I became a force in business when women were supposed to be decorative. We're kindred spirits, really. You're a murderer, Eleanor said quietly enough that only the three of them could hear. I'm a survivor, Patricia corrected, her warmth never wavering. Just as you are. Just as your husband is. We all have blood on our hands, Mrs. Mercer. The only difference is that I've learned to profit from it rather than pretend it makes me noble. Before either could respond, the mayor appeared to escort Patricia to the ceremony. She departed with a gracious nod, but not before adding, "Tea tomorrow, shall we say, 3 o'clock at my hotel suite. I promise you'll find it educational." The ceremony proceeded with speeches and ribbon-cutting, Patricia Ashford playing her role perfectly. She comforted a child who'd scraped his knee, donated an additional $10,000 when told the hospital still needed equipment, and charmed everyone from the roughest miner to the stuffiest society matron. "She's untouchable," Jonah said that evening as they prepared for the meeting. "Everyone loves her." "Everyone loved the Prescott brothers too until the truth came out," Eleanor reminded him. "We just need to find the crack in her armor." "And if there isn't one," Eleanor checked the small pistol she'd taken to carrying in her purse, "then we make one." The Grand Hotel's presidential suite had been transformed into Patricia Ashford's temporary court. Armed men stood guard discreetly, and Jonah counted at least 6 potential threats as they were escorted inside. Patricia sat at an elegant tea service looking like someone's beloved grandmother rather than a criminal mastermind. "No weapons, please," she said pleasantly. "Mr. Mercer, your shoulder holster is excellently tailored but still visible to the trained eye. And Mrs. Mercer, that purse is a bit heavy for fashion, isn't it?" They had no choice but to comply her men efficiently, relieving them of their weapons. Patricia poured tea with steady hands, the china delicate as butterfly wings. "Now then," she said, settling back in her chair, "let's discuss why you're really here." "You invited us," Jonah pointed out. "I meant here in the larger sense. Why you're pursuing me, why you can't simply accept that this is how the world works." "Because people are dying," Eleanor said. "Innocent people, families, children." "There are no innocent people," Patricia replied calmly. "Everyone is complicit in something. The ranchers you defend stole land from Indians. The townspeople profit from that theft. The entire American expansion is built on blood and lies. I'm simply honest about it." "You had judges murdered," Jonah said. "I had obstacles removed. Those judges were going to interfere with progress with the development that will make this territory prosperous. Their deaths, while regrettable, serve a greater purpose. Your purpose. Your profit." Patricia smiled. "Yes, my profit. But also the profit of thousands of others. The hospitals I build, the schools I fund, the orphanages I support, all of that comes from my enterprises. I take from the corrupt and give to the deserving. I'm practically Robin Hood." "Robin Hood didn't order the deaths of entire families," Eleanor shot back. Patricia's pleasant mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and ancient underneath. "Every empire requires sacrifice. Rome wasn't built without bloodshed. America wasn't born without revolution. I'm simply continuing a tradition as old as civilization itself." "And we're going to stop you," Jonah said firmly. Patricia laughed a genuinely amused sound. "Oh, Mr. Mercer, you already have stopped me. Or rather, you've forced me to evolve." She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the bustling street below. "Your investigation, your persistence has shown me that my current methods are becoming obsolete. The federal task force, the journalists asking questions, it's all becoming terribly inconvenient. So I'm changing tactics." "Meaning what?" Eleanor asked. "Meaning I'm going legitimate, completely boringly legitimate. I'm divesting from all questionable enterprises, cutting ties with unsavory associates, becoming exactly what I appear to be, a wealthy widow devoted to charity." "We have evidence. You have circumstantial connections, and the testimony of criminals who are now conveniently dead," Patricia interrupted. "Marcus Cordell killed in Mexico. William Prescott. He'll hang for his crimes, but I was merely one of hundreds of investors in his banks. Every trail you follow will lead to a dead end because I'm severing them all." "The murders will stop?" Jonah asked suspiciously. "The murders have already stopped. Haven't you noticed no new incidents in the past 2 weeks? My more enthusiastic employees have been retired or reassigned to legitimate operations. Just like that. Eleanor's voice was thick with disbelief. You're just walking away from it all. Evolution, my dear. The frontier is closing. The Wild West is becoming civilized. The methods that worked 5 years ago are now liabilities. Besides, Patricia's smile returned. I've already won. I own significant portions of every major industry in the Western Territories. I don't need violence anymore. I can achieve my goals through completely legal means. We'll expose you, Eleanor threatened. Everything you've done will sound like the ravings of conspiracy theorists. A respectable widow who builds hospitals and funds orphanages is secretly a criminal mastermind. Without proof, you'll be laughed out of every newspaper office in the country. She was right, and they all knew it. Patricia Ashford had played a longer game than anyone realized, and she was choosing to end it on her own terms, walking away with her fortune and reputation intact. There is, however, one loose end, Patricia continued, returning to her seat. You two. You know too much, suspect too much. You'll never stop hunting me, will you? Never, Jonah confirmed. I thought not, which is why I'm prepared to make you an offer. She pulled out a leather folder and placed it on the table. Inside is a deed to a ranch in California, twice the size of your current property. Also, bank drafts totaling $50,000 and letters of introduction to powerful people who can help your careers. All yours in exchange for your silence. You're trying to buy us? Eleanor asked incredulously. I'm offering you a future. Take it and live well. Refuse and, well, I won't need to kill you. You'll spend the rest of your lives chasing shadows trying to prove something unprovable while I continue my work through legal channels. You'll be the crazy couple who sees conspiracies everywhere eventually forgotten and irrelevant. Jonah reached for the folder, and for a moment Eleanor thought he was actually considering it. Instead, he pushed it back toward Patricia. We've both lost people we loved to your schemes, he said quietly. Clara, Sarah, the Hendersons, countless others. Their blood demands justice. Justice! Patricia stood abruptly, her composure finally cracking. You want to talk about justice? My husband was murdered by his business partners when he refused to participate in their corruption. The law did nothing. The police were bought, the judges paid off. I had to claw my way to power just to survive to protect myself. Everything I've built has been in service of making sure no one could ever hurt me again. So you became the monster you fought against, Eleanor said softly. Patricia's laugh was bitter. I became what the world forced me to become, just as you did, Mrs. Mercer. We're all shaped by our losses. The only difference is that I chose to win rather than simply endure. She moved to the door, signaling the meeting was over. You have 24 hours to reconsider my offer. After that, it's withdrawn forever, and we become competitors. I assure you I'm very good at competition. As they were escorted out, Patricia called after them. Oh, and Mr. Mercer. That wound in your side is healing nicely, but you should have it looked at. Infection can be so dangerous in this climate. It was a reminder that she knew everything about them, every weakness, every vulnerability. They retrieved their weapons and left the hotel in silence, both processing what had just happened. She's scared, Eleanor said once they were safely away. For all her confidence, she's scared of us. Scared enough to try buying us off, not scared enough to have us killed, Jonah observed. Why? Because killing us now would prove everything we've been saying. We're too visible, too connected to the investigation. Our deaths would raise questions she doesn't want asked. They returned to their ranch to find Marshal McKenna waiting with news. The task force is being disbanded. Orders from Washington. They're declaring the investigation inconclusive. She got to them, Jonah said. Probably. But there's something else. 3 of Patricia Ashford's top lieutenants have been found dead in the past week. Professional executions, very clean. She wasn't lying about cutting ties. She's eliminating witnesses, Eleanor realized. Anyone who could testify against her is being removed. By the time she's done, there won't be anyone left who can prove what she did, McKenna said grimly. She's going to get away with all of it. That night, Jonah and Eleanor sat in their garden, the weight of defeat heavy on their shoulders. They'd fought so hard, come so far, only to watch their enemy simply sidestep justice. "We could take her offer," Jonah said, not really meaning it. "We could." Eleanor agreed, not meaning it either. "But we won't." "No, we won't." They sat in silence, each lost in thought. Then Eleanor suddenly straightened, her eyes bright with revelation. "She's forgetting something," she said. "She's thinking like a criminal, covering her tracks, eliminating evidence. But she's about to become legitimate, respectable. And respectable people have different vulnerabilities." "What do you mean?" "I mean that criminals fear the law, but business people fear something else entirely: public opinion. Patricia Ashford, the crime lord, could weather accusations. But Patricia Ashford, the philanthropist, her entire new identity depends on public trust. We can't prove her crimes. We don't need to. We just need to raise enough questions that people start looking closer. Every charity she funds, we investigate. Every business deal she makes, we scrutinize. We become her shadow, her conscience, the doubt that follows her everywhere." It wasn't justice in the traditional sense, but it was something. They would be watchdogs, ensuring that Patricia Ashford's newfound legitimacy came with a price: constant surveillance, eternal vigilance. The next morning, they sent their response to Patricia's offer via telegram: "We decline your generous offer. See you in the newspapers. J&E Mercer." Patricia's response came within hours. "How disappointing, but not unexpected. May the best player win. PA." And so began a different kind of war, fought with investigations and articles rather than bullets. Eleanor published a series of pieces about the consolidation of wealth in the territories, never naming Patricia directly, but raising questions about the sources of certain fortunes. Jonah worked with reformed outlaws, gathering testimonies about crimes that couldn't be prosecuted but could be published. Patricia countered by donating even more to charity, building schools and hospitals, becoming so beloved that any criticism seemed churlish. She was playing a long game, building a legacy that would outlast any scandal. Months passed in this strange détente. They would occasionally see Patricia at public events, and she would nod cordially as if they were old friends playing a game whose rules only they understood. In a way, they were. Then came the night that changed everything. Jonah woke to the smell of smoke. The barn was on fire, flames already consuming the roof. He and Eleanor rushed out to fight the blaze, managing to save the horses, but losing the structure entirely. As they stood watching the flames, a figure emerged from the darkness. It was Cole Barrett, the gunman who'd walked away from the Prescott affair. "Wasn't me," he said immediately, hands raised. "I'm here with a warning. Patricia Ashford is dead." The words didn't make sense. They'd seen her just 2 days ago at a charity luncheon. "Murdered in her hotel room in Denver," Barrett continued. "Throat cut, very professional. The killer left a note. The patron is dead. Long live the patron." "Someone's taking over her organization," Eleanor breathed. "Someone who doesn't share her newfound desire for legitimacy," Barrett added. "Someone who wants to go back to the old ways, the violent ways. And they blame you two for forcing Patricia to go soft." "Who?" Jonah demanded. "Her protege, a woman named Catherine Morse. Young, brilliant, and completely ruthless. Patricia was grooming her to take over the legitimate businesses, but Catherine had other ideas. She wants the empire Patricia was abandoning. And she started by burning our barn. That's just the opening move. Catherine believes in sending messages. The barn tonight, maybe your house tomorrow, maybe you the day after. She wants you to run to hide, to know that you're being hunted." "Why warn us?" Eleanor asked suspiciously. Barrett shrugged. "Patricia paid me to. Not to protect you, but to inform you if anything happened to her. She said you'd know what to do with the information." Even in death, Patricia Ashford was playing games, setting pieces in motion. But this felt different, almost like a partnership. "There's more," Barrett said. "Patricia left something for you." He handed over a thick envelope. "Her lawyer will contest it, but she wanted you to have this immediately." Inside was a detailed accounting of Catherine Morse's crimes, murders, extortions, conspiracies, all documented in Patricia's meticulous hand. It was evidence enough to destroy Catherine if they could get it to the right authorities. "She knew," Eleanor said wonderingly. "Patricia knew Catherine would betray her. And she chose us as her insurance policy," Jonah added. "Even dead, she's still manipulating everyone." Barrett tipped his hat. "My debt's paid. What you do now is your business. But if I were you, I'd move fast. Catherine's already consolidating power, and she doesn't have Patricia's patience or subtlety. He disappeared into the night, leaving them with a burning barn and an impossible choice. They could walk away and let the criminals fight among themselves, or they could use Patricia's information to stop Catherine essentially completing their old enemy's final plan. "She played us perfectly," Eleanor said with grudging admiration. "Even now we're doing exactly what she wanted. But stopping Catherine is still the right thing to do. Is it? Or are we just replacing one evil with another?" Jonah didn't have an answer. The lines between justice and vengeance, between right and wrong, had blurred beyond recognition. They were no longer heroes in a simple morality tale. They were players in a complex game where even victories felt like defeats. As dawn broke, they made their decision. They would use Patricia's information, stop Catherine Morse, and try to dismantle what remained of the criminal empire. Not because Patricia wanted them to, but because it was still the right thing to do. They spent the day preparing, sending telegrams to trusted allies, copying the evidence, planning their approach. Catherine Morse was in Phoenix celebrating her ascension to power. She wouldn't expect them to move so quickly. "This feels like the beginning all over again," Eleanor said as they prepared to leave. "Except now we know the cost," Jonah replied. "We know that victory doesn't mean the end, just a pause before the next battle. And we know that sometimes the greatest enemy can become an unexpected ally, even from beyond the grave." They looked back at their ranch one last time. The garden still bloomed Clara's roses, resilient despite the smoke from the burned barn. It was a reminder that beauty could persist despite destruction, that life continued despite death. As they rode toward Phoenix and another confrontation with evil, Jonah reached over and took Eleanor's hand. They were older now, scarred by battles and betrayals, but they were still together, still fighting, still refusing to surrender to the darkness that threatened to consume the frontier. Behind them, smoke still rose from the barn's ashes. Ahead lay Catherine Morse and a new chapter in their endless war against corruption. But for this moment, riding side by side through the desert morning, they had each other. And that they had learned was enough to face any enemy, any challenge, any game that fate or human malice could devise. They were Jonah and Eleanor Mercer, and their story was far from over.